I first saw Hollow Creek as the sun was bleeding into the horizon, the sky a dull, bruised orange. The building leaned in on itself, sagging like it carried the weight of its own secrets. I parked my car and walked toward it, boots crunching over cracked concrete littered with shards of glass and fallen plaster. The air smelled faintly of smoke, a sweetness that made my throat tight. I couldn't tell if it was old cigarettes, burned wood, or something worse, something that had been left behind and refused to leave. The front doors were unlocked, swinging in a slow, uneven rhythm as if breathing. The hall inside was dark, though the fading light made long, lazy rectangles on the floor. Paint peeled from the walls in wide, curling sheets. I stepped inside, and the air was heavy, sticky with dust and something metallic, almost coppery. My footsteps echoed in the emptiness, though I swore I heard a second set of them somewhere deeper, out of sync with mine. I paused, listening. A soft scuff from above, a creak of the floorboards, a whisper maybe, or the wind. It's impossible to tell. The building seemed alive, breathing through the cracks in the walls and the broken windows in the way the old radiators groan when I passed. I felt eyes on me, though I knew it was too quiet for anyone to be there. Yet some part of me knew I wasn't alone. I moved further, running my hand along the chipped railing of the staircase. The wood was rough, splintering under my fingers. A smell of smoke hit stronger here, acrid and sharp, like a fire that had died only yesterday, but the charred wood was decades old. I wondered about the last people who lived here. Did they leave willingly, or did something push them out? A faded note stuck to the wall caught my eye, pinned by a rusty nail. The handwriting was small, cramped. "Don't stay too long. They're still here." I froze. My heart ticked faster, a slow, deliberate beat that felt too loud in the stillness. They could mean anything: pests, the wind, my imagination. But the way it was written, the pressure behind the letters, it spoke of fear, real fear. I stuffed the note into my pocket, but the words clung to me, a shadow on my mind, whispering that the building had seen more than I could understand. Upstairs, the apartments were hollowed out, stripped of furniture, yet some rooms carried traces of the people who'd lived there. A broken chair in one corner, a scorched curtain in another, a child's drawing pinned crookedly on the wall. The crayons had faded, the paper yellowed, but I could imagine the small hand that pressed it there. I wondered if the child had ever left, or if the child was still part of this building, hiding in the empty rooms, listening. I opened one door, the hinges protesting with a groan. Inside was a single bed frame, mattress long gone. The floorboards had dark stains, jagged lines across the wood that could have been water damage, could have been something else. The smell of smoke lingered strongest here, curling around my nostrils like a living thing. I wanted to step back to leave, but something drew me forward. A corner of the room was darker, and I thought I saw movement, but when I blinked, it was gone. The hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel, the dim light catching glimpses of shadow. I noticed the walls weren't just peeling, they were marked. Small scratches, clusters of tiny, deliberate marks in patterns I couldn't make sense of. Were they messages or warnings? I tried to remember if I'd read about Hollow Creek before, the reports of disappearances, the stories the locals whispered at night. None mentioned scratches or drawings on walls, just that the building was unpleasant. But unpleasant didn't explain this, not entirely. A soft scuff came again above me. I stopped and held my breath. Nothing. Then a faint laugh, barely audible, like a child breathing through the corners of a closed room. I shook my head, telling myself I was imagining it, that the wind or rats made such sounds. But the voice lingered in my ears longer than wind could. I moved on, careful to make no sudden noises, following the hallway deeper into the apartment complex. Each room was worse than the last. Broken cabinets, shattered glass, the remnants of people who had vanished or been forced to vanish. I tried to keep track of what was mine and what wasn't, but the rooms began to blur together. The smoke smell seemed to thicken, filling my lungs with every step, making it hard to breathe normally. I could feel it coating my throat, making each inhalation a deliberate act. I reached a room at the far end of the hall. The door was ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling into the corridor. I nudged it with my shoulder. The smell was strongest here, acrid, old, impossible to ignore. Inside, the walls were blackened with soot. The floor was littered with ash like a fireplace had exploded, and in the middle something moved, something too deliberate to be a trick of shadow. I froze. My heart thumped. A figure, maybe human, maybe not, stood in the corner. I couldn't make out details, just a shape, a presence. It didn't move, yet it pressed on me, heavy and cold, like the room itself had gathered fear into a shape. I blinked and it was gone. I exhaled slowly, the tension melting into my shoulders, but not entirely. The hallway seemed longer now, darker, as if the building was breathing around me. I left that room quickly, stepping lightly over broken debris. The hallway seemed endless, twisting in angles I hadn't noticed on the way in. Doors I didn't remember passing, doors that had to be new or newly revealed by the building itself. A cold breeze whispered through a window slit, brushing against my neck, carrying with it that faint, sweet smoke smell. The smell of life, or of life extinguished. As I turned another corner, I noticed faint scribbles on the wall. Words this time. Small, careful letters, almost invisible in the dust. They see you. I stopped, trying to rationalize it. Perhaps a prank. Perhaps some deranged tenant long gone. But the words seemed alive, vibrating in the air as though the building itself was confirming them. I swallowed hard. I wanted to leave. My instincts screamed at me. And yet some part of me, deeper, darker, wanted to see more, to understand, to know what had happened here. The building seemed to pulse in response to my hesitation, its silence thickening, listening. The faint creak of floorboards somewhere above reminded me again. I was not alone. I made my way back toward the main staircase. The sun was gone now, replaced by the gray, diffused light of early night. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching and shifting as I moved. The smell of smoke lingered, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I could hear it now, not just smell it. The faint crackle of burning wood somewhere deep in the building. And then I heard it, a whisper, soft, patient. "Why are you here?" I froze, my pulse hammered in my ears. The hallway was empty, and yet the words had a weight, a direction, a presence. Something unseen had spoken to me, and I realized that Hollow Creek didn't want visitors. It wanted witnesses, or perhaps it wanted company. I left the main hall slowly, every step deliberate. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that the building was watching, that my presence had awakened something. Something that lingered in empty rooms, in the faint smoke, in the broken walls. The last thing I saw before stepping outside was a window on the top floor, dark, but for a flicker, just for a moment. A shadow moving, watching, waiting. I stepped into the cool night air. My chest heaved. I told myself I was imagining it, that I would return with a camera, with friends, with lights. But deep down, I knew Hollow Creek had left its mark on me. And I knew, as I walked back to my car, that the building would not easily let me go. Even now, as I write this, I smell the smoke sometimes, faintly, in my dreams. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, I hear soft footsteps echoing behind me. Hollow Creek was empty, and yet it was far from abandoned. The stairs creaked beneath my weight, each step a small complaint that echoed through the hollow shaft. Upstairs, the hallway stretched like a tunnel of shadows, dim light from broken windows flickering across peeling paint. I thought I had been alone, but then I heard it, a soft, deliberate footstep behind me. Not my own. Slow, careful, waiting. I froze. My heart hammered, every beat loud in my ears. I told myself it was just the building settling, an old floorboard contracting in the night air. But it was too deliberate. The sound followed me, mirrored my pace exactly, then paused when I paused, a shadow mimicking my own hesitation. I moved on. The corridor smelled faintly of smoke, the same acrid sweetness from downstairs, but sharper now, tinged with something I couldn't identify, something older. The footstep followed, echoing softly behind me, never advancing, never retreating, as if it had no need to move faster than I did. I wanted to turn, to confront it, but my body refused. The doors along the hallway were closed, some warped, others hanging on broken hinges. I passed one and noticed a nameplate still intact. James Mallory Apt, 4B. I paused, running my hand along the chipped wood. James Mallory. The name struck a chord I couldn't place. I had read about him somewhere. A missing man vanished decades ago, leaving behind only a rent ledger and a fading photograph. I found the ledger on a table pushed against the wall, dust thick on its cover. Flipping through the pages, I saw his name again and again, dates scribbled carefully, ending abruptly one cold October. The handwriting was neat, precise. There were no notes of departure, no forwarding address. Just a blank line where his signature should have continued. And then nothing. The air shifted as I turned away from the ledger. A sudden cold draft brushed my neck, carrying with it the faint sound of movement, soft shuffling like footsteps over a carpet long gone. I froze again. The sound didn't belong to me. It was behind me, soft, insistent, but impossible to locate. I tried to tell myself it was rats, perhaps the wind, anything rational. But a rational part of me had already fled, leaving only tension coiling in my chest. Something about the upper floors of Hollow Creek felt alive, aware, waiting. I could almost feel its attention, brushing against the back of my mind, tugging at the edges of my thoughts. I moved to another door, this one ajar. Inside, the room smelled stronger of smoke, and the floorboards were blackened as if burned and scrubbed clean. The faint outline of a desk remained, and atop it, a small stack of papers. I leaned closer. The handwriting was hurried here, jagged and uneven. It mentioned James Mallory, dates, and then something that made my stomach tight. I hear them too, always behind me. I cannot leave. I stepped back. The words were almost alive, pressing against my skull. And then I heard it clearly, footsteps. Not soft this time, but deliberate, packing behind me. I spun around. The hallway was empty. I could see the door I had just passed, the windows cracked and dark. Nothing moved. Yet the sound continued, a rhythmic echo, too synchronized to be a coincidence. I gripped the railing along the staircase, my knuckles white. I considered going down, leaving the upper floors behind, but something drew me forward. A need to understand, to see what had been left behind. Each step was heavy with uncertainty, each breath a reminder that I was intruding in a place that had not wanted visitors for years. In the next apartment, I found more signs of occupation long gone. A single shoe, faded and cracked, rested against the wall. A chair toppled over, legs broken. And scrawled in the corner in charcoal or soot were the words, "They follow, always follow." I swallowed hard, the taste of smoke and dust coating my tongue. The footstep sound shifted then, moving slightly off rhythm. A small delay, almost as if it was testing me, waiting for my reaction. My skin prickled, every nerve taut. I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the darkened hallway, the broken window panes, the empty apartments. I saw nothing, but I felt presence, thick and patient, like a living weight in the air. On a wall, I noticed more tenant records pinned haphazardly. Faces, names, dates, some crossed out with red ink, others faded with age. James Mallory's face stared back at me from a yellowed photograph, eyes wide and anxious. A faint shadow at the corner of the image I couldn't place. A trick of light, I told myself. But the hair on my neck stood anyway. I moved past the records and paused near a corner window. Outside, the street was empty, overgrown with weeds, and the sun had disappeared entirely. Night had claimed the sky. I could see reflections in the glass, own shadow, and something else behind me. I spun, but the hallway was empty. My reflection alone stared back from the cracked glass. Yet the sensation of being watched remained, a tight grip on my chest. Then a whisper, faint but unmistakable, carried across the hall. "You shouldn't be here." My pulse raced. The words were soft, yet deliberate, filling the space around me. I told myself it was the wind again, that my imagination was bending to the strange architecture, but my instincts refused to agree. The hallway felt longer now, darker, twisting in ways it hadn't moments before. Doors I hadn't noticed before loomed ahead, some slightly open, some completely sealed, each one a potential hiding place for whatever shadow lingered here. I reached the stairwell at the far end. The steps were warped, edges jagged and splintered. I placed my foot carefully, descending slowly, and then I heard it again, footsteps packing behind me. This time I could swear they weren't just echoes. There was weight to them, a rhythm, a presence that waited for me to move. I pressed myself against the wall, heart hammering, eyes darting. Nothing, just the staircase and the faint smell of smoke curling from below. I exhaled slowly, telling myself to calm down. I had seen reports of Hollow Creek before, ghost stories, rumors of missing tenants, but I had never experienced it like this, never felt the building pressing on me, mirroring my fear, following me in real time. A door below creaked, not a door I had noticed before. The sound was subtle but distinct, a soft groan, almost like it was sighing. I froze, debating whether to investigate. My mind raced with the possibilities. Could someone be here? Could something have stayed behind all these years, refusing to leave? I took another step down and paused again. A shadow shifted in the corner of my eye, subtle but deliberate. I turned, but the hallway remained empty. Only the faint smell of smoke and the weight of something unseen lingering just beyond perception. By the time I reached the first floor, the footsteps had stopped. Silence fell heavy, thick with expectation. My chest heaved. I felt both relief and a deep unease, as though the upper floors had marked me, allowed me passage only to remind me I was being observed. I glanced back up the stairs, the dark shape of the upper floors looming. James Mallory's face haunted me from the photograph, the echo of his vanished presence pressing against my mind. Where had he gone? And who or what still lingered behind, tracing my steps, waiting for me to leave? I stepped into the first floor hallway and paused, listening to the emptiness. The building breathed around me, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I could still feel it pressing, waiting. Hollow Creek was empty, and yet the footsteps, the whispers, the weight of what had been left behind, all insisted that someone had never really left. And somewhere in the darkness above, I knew something was still following. The top floor was colder than the rest of Hollow Creek, or maybe I just noticed it now. The air felt heavier, thick with dust and the lingering tang of smoke, settling into my lungs like it had weight. The hallway stretched before me, dim light from a cracked skylight painting narrow stripes across peeling wallpaper. My feet made soft, hesitant noises on the warped floorboards, each step careful, deliberate, almost prayerful. I knew where the door was before I even saw it. At the very end of the hall, slightly recessed, its wood darker than the others, polished once but now worn to splintered roughness. A lock hung at its center, rusted but solid, refusing to give way. Years of vacancy hadn't weakened it. Something about its persistence made my chest tight. This door wasn't just a barrier, it was a challenge, a warning. I approached slowly, hand outstretched, hesitating just short of touching it. The hallway felt narrower here, the shadows denser, folding over themselves. Then I heard it, the faintest scratch, barely audible at first, like claws against wood. I froze. My heartbeat kicked in, loud and insistent. The scratches came again, more deliberate, rhythmic, as though the other side knew I was there, testing me, teasing me. A whisper followed, low, guttural, muffled, almost like it was speaking through a wall. I couldn't make out words at first. It was a language I didn't recognize, or maybe one I refused to hear. My mind filled with possibilities, someone trapped, someone hiding, something alive that had claimed this apartment as its own. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but curiosity clenched my chest and wouldn't let me move. I circled the door slowly, inspecting the lock, the frame. Scratches marred the wood, haphazard yet strangely patterned, like some desperate code waiting to be deciphered. The whispering continued, faint and patient, persistent enough to make the hair on my neck rise. I pressed my ear to the door. The scratching stopped instantly. Silence, but heavy, almost suffocating. I stepped back, hand trembling, trying to rationalize. Maybe it was rats. Maybe a pigeon had nested inside. Maybe my mind was inventing sounds in the thick dust and smoke. Yet deep down, I knew it was none of these things. The sound was intentional. Someone or something was in there. I could feel it. Not watching me like a predator watches prey, but aware, calculating. A consciousness beyond my understanding, waiting. The hallway behind me was empty, shadows stretching into corners I hadn't noticed before. Broken frames hung askew, and the faint smell of smoke twisted around me. I could see my breath now, even though it wasn't cold enough for fog. The air had weight presence, as if it had been compressed in this corridor, waiting for me to notice. I knelt to inspect the bottom of the door. Faint scratches carved lines into the floorboards, leading away from it, curling like a spider's web. I traced them with my finger, careful not to smudge the dust. The lines ended abruptly in the corner, as if whatever made them had paused, holding its breath. Another whisper, closer this time, pressed against my ear, low and urgent. "Don't." I jumped back, my pulse screaming. The voice had volume, yet no echo. It came from somewhere behind the door, unseen but undeniably there. My mind raced. Had someone survived here? How? Hollow Creek had been abandoned for years. Windows boarded up, water cut off, elevators gutted. Yet here was proof of life, or something like it, just beyond the wood and rusted lock. I circled the door again, more deliberately this time, trying to find a crack, a weak spot, a hint of what was inside. The scratches were more distinct now, jagged, angry almost, as though the door itself had been clawed at with frustration. My hand hovered over the handle, fingers trembling, but I didn't touch it. I didn't want to provoke it. I wanted to observe, understand, survive. A new sound joined the scratches and whispers, soft thumps, irregular like footsteps packing inside. Each one pressed against the lock, testing it, weighing my presence. I imagined the figure on the other side, crouched or standing, listening to me as intently as I listened to it. Fear and curiosity tangled inside me, impossible to separate. I wanted answers, and yet each moment brought me closer to something I might regret discovering. I remembered the ledger I had found downstairs. James Mallory, could this be connected? The thought curled cold around my spine. Maybe he or someone like him had retreated here, hiding from the world. Maybe this room had claimed him, shaped him into whatever made those scratches, those whispers, those careful footsteps. A shiver ran down my back. Could anyone survive this long in Hollow Creek, and what would they become? I pressed my palm against the door, cold and rough, feeling the vibration beneath it. The whispers paused, the scratches stilled. Silence pressed against me, thick and expectant. Then in the stillness I heard it. A soft inhalation, deliberate, patient, like a breath held too long. My stomach twisted. Someone or something was aware of me in a way that didn't feel human. It had sensed my curiosity, my hesitation, my fear. I stepped back. My mind raced. Could I stay here? Could I leave? The hallway stretched behind me, familiar yet different, darker, more oppressive. Shadows pooled in corners, shapes that weren't there before. I realized then that the building itself seemed alive, folding over itself to hide things I was never meant to see. A faint flicker of movement behind the door caught my eye. I blinked and it was gone. My imagination, I told myself. But the pattern repeated. Something shifted unseen, just beyond my perception, testing my eyes, my nerves, my reason. Each flicker felt like a pulse, a heartbeat, reminding me that the locked door was not a boundary. It was a point of contact, a warning, a promise. I stepped back to the center of the hallway. Silence stretched, thick and heavy. I tried to breathe, slow and deliberate, but each inhale carried the smell of smoke, the weight of dust and something older, fear left behind by whoever had last lived here. I could almost see them, pressed against the wood, watching, waiting for me to move, to falter. I leaned closer again, curiosity clawing at my mind. Scratches, whispers, the rhythm of footsteps inside, all signs of life or something like it. My hand hovered near the handle, but I didn't touch. Not yet. I wasn't ready to face whatever was inside. The door seemed to sense my hesitation, the tension vibrating through the wood, through the lock, into my fingers. And then the whispers returned, sharper, urgent this time. "Go leave." The voice carried urgency, but also a warning, almost protective. I froze. Protective of what? The building, something inside it, or perhaps of me. The thought twisted in my gut. I wanted to understand, to peek behind the door, but the risk pressed against me like a living wall. I stepped back again, listening. The hallway stretched, silent now except for my own breathing. The locked door loomed at the end, dark and patient. I realized then that this wasn't just a door. It was a presence, a living threshold between the world I knew and the world that had survived inside Hollow Creek for years. a world I might not survive. I turned toward the stairwell, heart heavy, mind racing. Every instinct told me to leave, yet curiosity lingered, whispering that answers waited just beyond the lock. Something, someone, had survived here, hidden from the world, shaping its own reality, leaving traces in scratches, whispers, footsteps. And that presence was still aware of me, still observing, still waiting. As I descended toward the first floor, the weight of the locked door pressed in my mind. Hollow Creek was not empty. It never had been. That door, stubborn and rusted, held secrets I was not yet ready to face. But I knew one thing with certainty. It was alive, and it had noticed me. And somewhere inside, beyond the lock and the scratches, it waited, patient, watchful, unseen. I stepped out of Hollow Creek into the cold night air, and immediately the building seemed larger than it should have been, taller, broader, as if it had grown in my absence. The moon was thin, slicing the sky with pale light, and shadows pooled around the structure like ink spilled on concrete. I tried to tell myself I was done, that I had seen enough, that curiosity had been sated. But the weight in my chest told me otherwise. The hallway's emptiness followed me in memory, the soft scratches, the whispered breaths, the rhythmic footsteps that never existed on my side of reality. I could still feel them pressing against my back, urging me to look over my shoulder, to confirm what I already knew. I was being observed still. I walked slowly, boots crunching on gravel, my breath misting in the night. Every instinct told me to run, to leave this place and never look back. But another, quieter part of me, a part I didn't trust, wanted to turn, to look at the windows on the top floor to see if anything was there. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the street, the weeds, the shattered fences, anything human and ordinary. Yet Hollow Creek wasn't done with me. A soft sound brushed against my ears, an echo of a footstep, deliberate and slow, like it had been following me all this time. I froze. My pulse throbbed, echoing the rhythm of that invisible tread. It didn't matter that I had left the building. It didn't matter that the doorways and hallways were behind me. The sound carried with me, lingering, persistent, as if the walls themselves had imprinted it onto my senses. I turned toward the building instinctively, though I knew I would see nothing. The windows were dark, unbroken glass reflecting the moonlight in quiet streaks. Nothing moved. And yet, the feeling of being watched had intensified. It pressed against my shoulder like a physical weight, an invisible hand reminding me that Hollow Creek was patient. It waited. My mind flickered back to the ledger, to James Mallory, the man who vanished without a trace, leaving only the faintest echoes of his existence. Had he ever left? Or had the building kept him, shaped him into something that waited in the cracks and corners, in the whispering silence of locked doors? I shivered. That thought crawled through me, cold and slow, and settled into my chest. I tried to shake it off. Rational explanations, I told myself. Years of vacancy, the imagination working against me, adrenaline twisting reality. But rationality felt thin, fragile, insufficient. The final echo, whatever it was, had followed me out. I could feel it in the empty spaces behind my eyes, a faint vibration in my skull that whispered of presence, something that never truly left Hollow Creek. The street was empty. Not a car, not a stray cat, nothing but the rustling wind and the overgrown weeds. Yet every shadow seemed to stretch, bend, lean toward me. I imagined the top floor windows, one of them cracking open just slightly, and a figure watching, patient, still bound to that place. My steps slowed. I wanted to look to see, but fear wrapped itself around my throat like smoke. I remembered the whispers, faint and hesitant at first, then sharp, insistent. Do, leave. They follow, each syllable a fragment, a puzzle I could not solve. And now, out here in the open, I realized the whispers had never been about leaving Hollow Creek physically. They had been about leaving the awareness of it, leaving the presence that had touched me, traced me, and somehow attached itself to my perception. A soft sound then broke my thoughts. Not behind me, not ahead, but inside my head. A low creak, a scratching like nails against wood. I stopped mid-step, holding my breath. My pulse screamed. It didn't belong to anything outside. It wasn't the wind. And yet it was real. real enough to make my ears burn, my skin crawl, my chest tighten. I closed my eyes, shaking my head, trying to clear the noise. But the sound persisted, a slow, dragging echo that seemed to originate from nowhere and everywhere at once. I remembered the locked door on the top floor, the scratches, the muffled whispers, the deliberate footfalls. And a single, undeniable thought formed in my mind. James Mallory had never left, or if he had, something of him remained. Something that had found a way to linger in the building, and now somehow in me. I exhaled slowly, trying to ground myself, focusing on the gravel underfoot, the distant glow of streetlights, the faint scent of smoke drifting on the night air. It worked just enough. The echo quieted but didn't disappear. It had retreated, waiting like a predator confident in its patience. I felt my shoulders loosen slightly, but my awareness remained taut, stretched thin. Hollow Creek had marked me. It had given me this echo to carry, a thread connecting me to the building long after I had walked away. The quiet night offered small relief, brief glimpses of normality. A distant car passed, its headlights cutting through the weeds and broken fences. A crow called, sharp and startling, and I felt a flicker of reassurance. But beneath it all, the echo lingered, subtle yet undeniable. My thoughts returned to the top floor, the locked door, the scratches and whispers. I had been close enough to feel them, to sense the life, or lifelike presence, still contained within. And now that presence had followed me, insinuating itself into my perception, refusing to let me forget. I reached my car and paused, keys in hand. The vehicle was a small, familiar object, ordinary in every sense. Yet the echo pressed against me even here, quiet but insistent. I wondered if, once I drove away, the sound would remain, tracing the edges of my awareness, whispering reminders that Hollow Creek was never empty, never harmless. Sliding into the driver's seat, I tried to push the thoughts away, to focus on the engine, the road, the world outside the building's walls. But even as I turned the key, the echo returned in my mind. A single sound, faint but clear, as if coming from the locked room itself. The sound of a man, moving, deliberate, unseen, and yet intimately present. I didn't know if it was Mallory, or something he had become, or something else entirely. I didn't know if it was a remnant of the building, a hallucination, or a warning. All I knew was that it persisted, a final, inexplicable note, echoing in my mind, suggesting that the top floor, the locked door, and the man, whoever he was, had never truly released their grip. I started the engine, the low hum filling the silence, and drove slowly away, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. Hollow Creek receded in distance, but not in presence. Its silhouette remained etched in my awareness, shadowed and patient. And then I heard it again, the faintest sound, like a footstep, a scrape, a breath, inside my head or maybe behind me. I couldn't tell. The night carried me forward, but the echo remained. I realized then that I had been changed, altered in a way I could not name. Hollow Creek had not just shown me its secrets. It had left a part of itself inside me, something unseen, patient, and waiting that I would carry wherever I went. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear it. A single, deliberate sound, too subtle to be noticed by anyone else. A reminder, a warning, a presence that refuses to let go. Hollow Creek may be behind me, but it is not gone, and perhaps it never will be. The gate gave a rusty groan when I pushed it open, like it hadn't moved in decades and was startled awake. A cold wind carried the smell of old oil and damp metal, curling into my lungs with a weight that made me notice every breath. The mill stood ahead, enormous and fractured, a skeleton of steel and brick, its windows' black eyes staring at me. Locals whispered about it, about people who went in and never came out. But standing there alone, I felt the stories were only half the danger. The other half lived in the shadows already. The front doors were splintered, one barely hanging on its hinges. I nudged it and it swung inward with a squeal that echoed through the hollow interior. The sound faded, swallowed by darkness, leaving only the distant, faint drip of water somewhere deep inside. My flashlight barely cut through the gloom, painting long, thin shadows across machinery that was once alive with motion, but now leaned silently like rusted giants. The floorboards under me shivered with every step, flexing as though unsure whether to hold me or collapse. I felt exposed, but also drawn forward, compelled to see what the building had preserved in its long abandonment. As I walked, the machines themselves seemed to breathe, pipes groaning, gears settling, belts squeaking under their own weight. The sound was subtle at first, almost polite, then insistent, rhythmic, as if the mill were reminding me that it remembered the work it had once done. I stepped past a loom, its frame rusted brown, wires curled like dying vines. A shadow darted at the edge of my light, vanishing before I could focus. My chest tightened, adrenaline slipping into my hands and feet. I told myself it was only the way the light hit the machinery, the angle of the shadows. But a part of me, smaller, quieter, knew the movement wasn't mine, wasn't imagined. I climbed a narrow stairwell to the upper floor. Each step creaked under my weight, a protest that carried through the cavernous space. Up here, the smell of oil and decay intensified, mixing with something sweeter, metallic, like blood long dried. The light from my flashlight picked out fragments of old notice boards and torn safety signs, yellowed and curling at the edges. I stopped at one, brushing dust aside to reveal faint writing, names, dates, initials. Some marked missing workers, some scratched out violently, the meaning lost to time. The machinery on this floor was different, smaller, more delicate, wires and cogs that must have spun with precision. I leaned close to one, noticing how the gears had rusted in mid-motion, a record of halted labor. A faint vibration hummed under my fingers, almost imperceptible, like the memory of work still lingering in the metal. I stepped back. The sound faded. Or maybe it hadn't faded. Maybe I was imagining it, listening too hard for the life the mill refused to relinquish. A staircase led to a catwalk above the main floor. I climbed it cautiously, flashlight angled down, illuminating belts and wheels that had once moved with perfect synchronization. I imagined the mill alive, workers moving in rhythm, the air thick with heat and the sound of machinery. And then I imagined it empty, quiet, except for the echo of my own steps. A shiver traced my spine. The quiet was too deep, too attentive, like the building was listening. I crouched near a press, its lever froze in mid-swing, and ran my hand over the cold metal. The surface was rough, pitted with rust, yet it hummed faintly under my touch, a vibration that rose into the bones of my hand. I pulled back sharply. Something had shifted, a shadow, a movement against the grain of the light. It was gone when I turned, but the feeling remained. I was not alone, not entirely. The mill had corners and rooms I could not see from where I stood. Each one seemed darker than the last, holding more than dust. I walked down a narrow corridor, flash sweeping over stacks of discarded textiles, bales that had fallen and torn open, stuffing spilling like pale clouds. The shadows between them flickered unnaturally, stretching toward me as if they had intention. My foot nudged a loose board and it clattered. The echo carried too long, bouncing off walls, returning like a whispered warning. I stopped listening. The building was alive with subtle motion, a creak from above, a rattle to my right, a soft sigh that might have been wind or might not. I told myself it was nothing, but the air grew colder. Brushing my neck and arms, my flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath, smacking the side, but the light stabilized. Shadows seemed to pulse in rhythm with some secret beat. Something or someone was aware of me here. I pressed onward, each step measured. A large press stood at the center of the room, its wheel coated in a thin layer of grime. As I approached, a faint noise tickled the edge of hearing, a metal scraping, deliberate, slow. My heart skipped. The sound repeated, not loud, but close, intimate, almost conversational. I spun, flashlight cutting through the darkness. Nothing, just bales of cloth and silent machinery. And yet the scrape continued, following me like a shadow with its own will. I moved toward a side door, half collapsed and rotting. Beyond it, a smaller room held looms lined along the walls. Threads hung like cobwebs, dust-coated and brittle. The air smelled sharper here, tangy, like rust and decay mixed with faint iron. I noticed a name scratched into the floorboards. Carter, 1924. Another, Holloway, 1925. Some were crossed out, not cleanly but with jagged lines, a rage frozen in scratches. My stomach twisted. These were the people who had worked here, and some had vanished. Names left behind, echoes of their presence. A low creak sounded from the back of the room, from the farthest loom. I froze, eyes straining through dust and shadow. Something moved, not fast, slow, calculated. And I realized the movement wasn't the machine settling. It had intention. I took a cautious step forward. The shadows thickened, curling against the light. My chest tightened. A gust of air stirred the threads, brushing my cheek, carrying a whisper too faint to hear clearly. I imagined voices, voices of those long gone, trapped in the mill, woven into the machinery, stitched into the fabric of this place. My pulse raced. I wanted to leave, to flee back into the night. And yet, curiosity clawed at me, drawing me closer to the source. The far loom swayed gently, though no breeze moved. I held my breath. The scrape from before returned, softer this time, like it was circling me, following, watching. I could feel the vibration in the air, subtle, almost a heartbeat. A shadow at the edge of my flashlight's beam seemed to detach itself, stretching, folding against the light. I blinked. It vanished. Or maybe it never moved. Maybe I had just noticed it for the first time. I backed away slowly, scanning the room, the machinery, the broken windows. The echo of the scrape persisted, a subtle insistence that I acknowledge it, respect it. My hands trembled, flashlight swinging slightly, catching glimpses of rusted wheels, the jagged edges of broken levers. The mill was alive, not in the way humans think of life, but in the way memory can linger, in the way absence can be full. I turned toward the exit, forcing myself to walk with deliberate steps. Each floorboard groaned under me, each shadow seemed to bend toward me, whispering of work, of labor, of people who had disappeared without trace. And as I left the room, a final sound followed me, a long, low metallic groan, like the mill exhaling after a long sleep. I swallowed hard, chest tight. The machinery was watching. The shadows were patient. And I understood, somewhere deep down, that Hollow Creek wasn't the only place that remembered. I found the logbooks in a small, dust-choked office on the second floor. They were stacked in a corner, leaning against the wall as though they had been abandoned in a hurry. I brushed off the top layer of dust and opened the first volume. The pages were yellowed and brittle, the ink faded in places, smudged in others. Names, dates, job titles, each entry carefully recorded, meticulous in its indifference. But as I flipped through, I noticed something strange: gaps. Spaces left intentionally blank or crossed out, sometimes both. And next to some of the names, a single word: gone. The air in the room was colder than the hallways outside. It wasn't just a drop in temperature. It was a presence, like the mill itself was exhaling, brushing past me with something almost alive, reminding me that it remembered. I shivered and pulled my jacket tighter. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand, casting flickering shadows across the stacks of paper and the cornered filing cabinets. I read the first few names aloud under my breath: Carter, Holloway, Lawson. Each one sounded heavier than the last, weighted with absence. The word gone after Lawson was smudged, almost bleeding into the page like it wanted to spread, reach out. I realized that these weren't just names. They were markers, ghosts frozen in ink, reminders of people who had disappeared while the machines hummed and groaned and the walls listened. I paused at one entry, dated 1927. The name was James Mallory. I recognized it vaguely from the rumors locals whispered. A man who entered the mill one morning and never returned. No body, no explanation, nothing but the faint memory of him lingering in the stories passed down like a warning. My fingers hovered over the page. Something about the ink seemed darker here, thicker, as though the words had absorbed more than just time. A creak sounded from the hallway outside the office. My breath caught and my head whipped toward the door. Nothing, just shadows. I told myself it was the floorboards shifting under the weight of the building settling, but my ears burned with a faint echo, soft enough that I could almost dismiss it as imagination. Almost. I returned to the logbook, turning pages with care. More names, more dates. Some entries ended abruptly, others had notes scribbled in the margins. Left work early, never returned from lunch, found wandering near machinery. A pattern emerged, subtle, like a low hum beneath the surface of the paper. People vanished here, sometimes slowly, sometimes instantly. And the mill kept the record, preserved it, whispered it quietly through the pages and the walls. I ran my fingers over the bindings, feeling the texture of decay, the ridges of time pressing into the covers. Each logbook had its own weight, a quiet gravity that seemed to anchor me to the past. I realized that even though I was physically here, decades apart from these workers, the mill had a way of pulling the present into the same space as the past. It wanted me to remember, to see, to know. The shadows in the office deepened. My flashlight caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of its beam, or maybe it was a trick of the light, a shadow stretching where it shouldn't. I held my breath, listening to the quiet hum of the mill. Pipes groaned, belts shifted slightly, and the faintest scrape sounded from somewhere deep in the building. It followed a rhythm, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat I wasn't meant to hear. I flipped further through the pages and found a list of missing workers spanning decades. Some names repeated across years as if the same person or a memory of them kept resurfacing. I stared at the handwriting, at the careful notes and the sudden, jagged marks. One name was circled in dark ink, Mallory. Someone had emphasized him. And beneath it, in almost unreadable script, never left. My skin crawled. I told myself to calm down. The logbooks were old, the writing faded, ink smeared by humidity and time. Yet the words seemed to pulse beneath my fingertips, alive with meaning, insistently suggesting that this place didn't forget, that it never forgot. The office felt smaller suddenly, the shadows pressing closer. I noticed the faint smell of oil again, heavier now, mingled with something faintly metallic and bitter. The air wasn't just cold, it was aware. I could feel it move around me, brushing my neck, tugging gently at my sleeves, teasing me with something intangible. I wanted to leave, to close the logbooks and step back into the hallways I had walked before. But my hands, my mind, felt tethered here, pulled into the weight of the recorded absences. A subtle noise made me flinch, a soft tap against the floorboards behind me. I froze, chest tightening, eyes scanning the room. The sound repeated, deliberate but slow, not loud enough to fully startle me, but enough to make my pulse thrum. The mill wasn't empty. Maybe it never had been. Maybe it just kept the living and the dead folded together, layering memory over absence, shadow over flesh. I turned back to the logbooks, unable to resist. My flashlight beam fell across a page I hadn't seen yet. The entries were older here, more faded, but the last name leapt out at me. Mallory James gone, beneath it faint scribbles. Stayed behind, listened too long, echoes follow. My fingers trembled as I traced the words. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The mill had recorded not just disappearance, but lingering presence, and somehow it expected me to notice. I glanced around the office again. Shadows pooled in corners, long and dark, almost moving against the beam. The sound of the pipes and machinery seemed sharper here, more deliberate, synchronized with something I couldn't see. I swallowed hard, heart racing, trying to tell myself it was just the building settling, just the machinery creaking. But even as I said it, a faint whisper threaded through the air, brushing my ear with a syllable I couldn't make out. My fingers lingered on another page, dated 1932. Another gone, another name. And then a note in the margin, still watching. I froze. My eyes darted around the office. Nothing, yet the presence was undeniable. It wasn't tangible, not in a way I could touch, but it pressed against my awareness, subtle and insistent. Someone or something was here, or someone's memory had stayed behind, tethered to these names and these pages. The air grew colder, heavier, carrying faint echoes of movement. A shuffle, a sigh, something just beyond perception. I felt my pulse in my ears. The logbooks weren't just records. They were warnings, anchors, voices that had survived the decay of decades. And now, standing here, I felt the weight of all of them pressing gently but insistently against me. I closed the logbook slowly, careful not to disturb whatever still lingered. The whispers faded, leaving only the hum of the mill, low and deliberate. I looked around, letting my flashlight sweep the room, and in the half-light the shadows seemed to hold shape, longer than they should have, curling toward the walls as if listening, waiting. I left the office, stepping carefully over broken floorboards. The hallway stretched out, dim and silent, yet alive in a way I could feel deep in my chest. Names and absences pressed behind my eyes, tugging at memory and imagination. The mill wasn't just a building. It was a ledger of presence, absence, and lingering echoes. It had recorded lives, disappearances, and warnings, and now, somehow, it had recorded me noticing. As I walked past the rusted machinery, I thought of James Mallory and the other forgotten names. The scrape of a belt, a faint creak, a soft metallic groan echoed somewhere deep in the building, reminding me that memory has weight and absence has voice. I wasn't alone, not in the sense I had thought. Hollow places remember, and sometimes they whisper, just softly enough that you notice, just enough to make you wonder if you've really left, or if you're already part of the ledger too. The doorway to the loom room yawned like a mouth frozen mid-scream. Dust motes swirled in the weak shafts of light that filtered through the grimy windows. I stepped inside, boots scraping the cracked concrete floor, and immediately the air felt thicker, heavier, as if the room itself was inhaling slowly around me. The loom stood in rigid lines, giant skeletons of metal and wood, silent but full of implied movement, their belts and gears frozen in time. I paused near the first loom, reaching out instinctively, fingertips brushing the cold, rough metal. A shiver ran up my arm, and I realized the machinery wasn't just cold, it was expectant. It waited for me to notice something, or maybe for me to acknowledge that I wasn't supposed to be here alone. My flashlight cut across the room, and shadows stretched long and jagged across the floor. I could have sworn that one of them moved slightly when I blinked. The whispers began almost immediately. At first I thought it was the wind slipping through cracks in the walls, rattling the loose panels. Then I realized it was too deliberate, too rhythmic, soft, insistent. A voice, barely audible, repeating a name. I strained my ears. James. I froze, the syllable brushing the back of my mind like a finger trailing across a spine. James. Mallory. My pulse quickened. Could it be a trick of memory, the names from the logbooks bleeding into perception? Or was something alive in the room, whispering just loud enough for me to hear? I moved slowly between the looms, careful to let the beam of my flashlight dance across the machinery without settling too long. Every shadow felt like it had its own weight, as if someone, or something, was crouched in the corner, watching, waiting. The air smelled faintly of rust and oil, a sweetness under the decay, like metal mixed with something organic, almost like blood. One loom, larger than the others, drew me closer. Its gears were massive, a network of interlocking teeth frozen mid-turn. The wood groaned as I leaned my hand against it, a low hum echoing through the room, almost imperceptible, vibrating in my bones. The whisper came again, the name repeating, urgent this time, pulling at the edges of my awareness. James, James. I spun, flashlight slicing through the gloom, expecting to catch movement. Nothing. Just the looms, silent and cold, and the lengthening shadows crawling along the walls. I swallowed hard, trying to ground myself. I told myself it was memory, imagination, the same way the logbooks had pressed their weight on me. But the whisper had cadence, insistence, a rhythm that made it feel alive. I edged further into the room, my boots soft against the concrete. Between the looms, I noticed faint marks on the floor, scrapes, like fingernails against metal, dark against the dust. I crouched to inspect them, heart thudding. The marks were recent, impossibly so. Dust should have settled over them decades ago. Yet here they were, fresh, dark lines cutting across the gray. Someone or something had been here. A sudden creak made me whip around. A loom far across the room shifted slightly, though I had seen it frozen before. The chains rattled in a delicate, almost hesitant motion, like a living thing testing the air. I shivered, feeling the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. I pressed on, flashlight beam skimming over another logbook, abandoned on a table near the far wall. Pages were yellowed, brittle with age, entries dating back decades. I flipped it open, reading hurried, cramped handwriting, names, dates, absences. Some were circled. Some were crossed out with a single jagged line. and beneath one entry a note scribbled hastily. "Listen too long." I swallowed. The words seemed to hum in the air around me, vibrating alongside the whisper of James, aligning in a rhythm that made my chest tight. I wanted to leave, yet I couldn't stop reading. The logbooks, the machinery, the air itself. They were all tied together, recording presence and absence, memory and disappearance. And now, somehow, they were recording me. The whisper came again, this time from behind me, soft and urgent. "James." I spun, flashlight slicing through the gloom. Nothing. Just the looms, their shadows curling like waiting hands. My stomach churned with unease. I stepped back, boots scraping against the floor, and noticed faint footprints in the dust. Not mine. Smaller, lighter, erratic, weaving between the machinery as though someone had moved swiftly and silently just moments ago. I followed them cautiously, the whispering growing louder in cadence but never closer, as if the sound itself was teasing me, leading me through the maze of rusted giants. Each step brought a new detail into sharp focus. A snapped belt here, a rusted pulley there, shadows that stretched impossibly long, bending toward the walls and ceiling. The room felt alive, aware of my intrusion. I paused near a large loom at the center of the room, the tallest one, its gears massive and interlocked. The whisper surged, urgent now, repeating the name in a way that made my pulse spike. "James, you can't leave." The words brushed my ears, but no one was there. I realized then that the loom itself seemed to vibrate subtly, a low, resonant hum that harmonized with the whisper. The machinery wasn't dead. It had absorbed something over decades, fear, absence, maybe even the people who had vanished. And it was speaking now, through echoes and shadows. A sudden breeze, impossible in a sealed room, stirred the dust. My flashlight flickered, and for the briefest instant I thought I saw a figure among the looms, a man indistinct, shadowed, staring directly at me. I blinked. Gone. Only the stillness of the metal remained. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. The whisper had stopped, leaving a ringing silence that pressed against my eardrums. I took a hesitant step back, brushing past the logbook on the table. A loose page slipped to the floor. I picked it up, reading the faded ink. "The loom watches, the loom listens, those who remain are never gone." My stomach turned. The mill, the machinery, the whispering voice, it all pointed to one conclusion I wasn't ready to accept. Some presence had lingered here long after the workers vanished. Some fragment of life, or something pretending to be life, was still active among these frozen giants. The shadows shifted again. The room seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting in tandem with my own pulse. The faint scrape of metal on concrete echoed, though I could see no movement. And then from somewhere deep within the maze of looms, the whisper returned, a fragment more urgent, almost pleading. "James." I swallowed hard, feeling my nerves stretch taut. My flashlight beam flicked across the room once more, catching the looms in sharp relief. I tried to convince myself I was alone, that the sound was memory, imagination, the way old buildings whisper in drafts and rust. But the movement in the shadows, the subtle hum beneath the metal, the insistence of the voice, I knew that wasn't imagination. I stepped backward slowly, turning toward the doorway. Dust rose in small clouds around my boots. The whisper followed, faint, just behind my ears. "James, stay." I wanted to run, to leave, but my feet felt weighted, my body tethered to the room, to the echoes, to the logbooks and the names they recorded. Each loom, each shadow, each whisper was a thread connecting me to the past, to the vanished, to something I couldn't name. The machinery wasn't frozen. It was waiting, listening, alive in a way I could feel pressing against my chest. I finally reached the doorway, stepping out. But even as I left, the last echo followed me, brushing against my mind like a finger on skin. "James." Outside, the hallways felt emptier yet heavier. The loom room's presence lingered, a pressure behind my eyes, a vibration under my skin. I knew I hadn't left it behind. It had marked me, named me, woven me into its silent record. And somewhere in the dark, the whisper still waited, patient and insistent, promising it wasn't done yet. The cliff rose sharply from the black water, jagged rocks thrusting up like broken teeth. The lighthouse stood at the edge, white paint flacking, its top shrouded in fog that clung to the cliffs like a living thing. I could barely hear the waves below, the fog swallowing the roar into a soft, hollow thrum, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. I parked my car on the cracked dirt path and stepped out, boots crunching over loose stones. The air was damp, heavy with the smell of salt and something else, something metallic, almost like blood but old, buried. The fog pressed in around me, hiding the cliff edge from view, and I felt that first prickling unease, that small voice in the back of my mind whispering, "Don't go too close." I walked toward the lighthouse, its iron door rusted shut, but just loose enough to let me push it open. The hinges groaned, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the fog. Inside, the air was cold, carrying the faint scent of mildew and old smoke. The spiral staircase curled up into darkness. My flashlight cut through the gloom, a narrow beam catching peeling paint, warped wood, and the scattered remnants of life that had long since left. There was a chair at the base of the stairs, tipped over, a thick layer of dust settling over it. The sight was innocent enough, but I felt its presence. The sense that someone or something had been here, had left in a hurry or lingered silently just out of reach. I shivered, forcing the thought down. Old buildings always feel alive after humans leave, I told myself. They remember. They echo. Step by step, I climbed the spiral stairs, the metal railing slick with rust, the wind moaning faintly through cracks in the walls. My flashlight flickered, throwing shadows that danced like dancers in the fog beyond the windows. I paused, thinking I saw movement in the corner of my eye. A figure, a trick of the light. The fog outside warped everything. My pulse quickened. At the landing, a small window offered a view of the cliff and the water. The fog hung low, dense and white, swallowing the horizon. I could barely see the waves breaking against rocks, their sound now just a muted thump like drums underwater. And then I noticed something on the ledge below, a set of footprints pressed into the damp stone, leading up to the lighthouse and stopping abruptly. No one could have climbed that cliff recently. I was alone. But the prints were there, fresh in appearance, as if someone had walked the edge just moments ago. A whisper of wind carried a sound, soft, deliberate, almost a voice. I froze. The fog outside roiled, thick and quick, like it had gathered its own intent. It pressed against the windows, against the door, as though it wanted to come inside. My hand tightened on the railing, heart hammering. Was it the wind? Or was something else waiting, patient and unseen? I climbed the next flight, the staircase groaning under my weight. The higher I went, the tighter the spiral, the more the fog seemed to seep through the walls, curling around me like fingers. Shadows shifted with the flicker of my flashlight, and I felt the lighthouse watching me, each step echoing a little too long, too hollow. Near the top, the room opened into a circular chamber. The glass panels of the lantern were cracked and clouded with age. The fog pressed close against the glass, and I could see my own reflection faintly in the distorted panes. But something else moved behind me in the reflection, a flicker, a shadow that didn't belong to me. I spun, flashlight cutting through the air. Nothing. The chamber was empty, silent except for the hum of the wind against the lighthouse walls. I stepped closer to the center, my flashlight sweeping over the rusted mechanism of the rotating lamp. It had been frozen for years, gears seized with rust, but as I approached, I thought I saw the lens quiver imperceptibly like it breathed. My chest tightened. The fog outside surged, and I felt a cold wash of air sweep past me from nowhere, brushing the back of my neck. I swallowed hard. I was no longer entirely certain that I was alone. The floor beneath the lantern felt uneven, warped by time. I noticed something etched faintly into the wood, nearly worn away, a name. Just a single word carved decades ago, Elias. My pulse stuttered. Why here? Why now? And then a faint tapping echoed from above, somewhere in the lighthouse's uppermost height. Not loud enough to be heard clearly, but deliberate, slow, patient. Someone was up there, or had been. I climbed the final spiral, each step tight and narrow. The top of the lighthouse opened to a small platform. The fog pressed against it like a wall. I could barely see a few feet ahead. The ocean below was hidden, the cliff swallowed entirely, leaving only white, cold emptiness. The air here carried a whisper, almost melodic, twisting in the wind. Elias. I froze, the sound vibrating through the fog, through the metal of the railing into my chest. My name, perhaps, though I could not be certain. It was a voice, deliberate, urgent, but impossible to locate. I scanned the fog, flashlight slicing through the whiteness, but there was nothing. No one, nothing to explain it. A shiver crawled up my spine. I stepped back, the wind tugging at my coat, whispering like it knew something I did not. My mind spun with questions I couldn't answer. Who had been here before me? Why carve a name into the wood of a long-abandoned lighthouse? Why did the fog feel aware, pressing against me with intent? I turned to leave, only to catch sight of something moving in the corner of my eye, a shadow sliding along the railing impossibly fast. I spun, but the fog had thickened and nothing remained. The lighthouse itself seemed to breathe, the walls creaking with a low groan, echoing my own quickened heartbeat. I felt the isolation press down, the cliff, the fog, the empty platform, everything conspiring to remind me that some places are not meant to be alone. I descended slowly, boots careful on the narrow steps, every creak and groan amplified. The whisper followed me, faint but persistent. Elias, come back. The wind moaned against the glass panes, carrying an almost tangible chill. My flashlight trembled in my hand. Every instinct screamed to leave, to run down the path to my car and away from this cliff, this fog, this hollow sentinel of the past. But something in me hesitated. The fog had a story, and I was part of it now, whether I liked it or not. At the base, I paused, catching my breath. The lighthouse towered above me, white and weathered, shrouded in fog that now seemed to pulse, alive in a way the air should not. I turned my flashlight to the ground, and there again were footprints in the dirt, leading not away from the lighthouse but circling back, small, precise, as if someone, or something, was waiting for me to follow. The sea beyond the cliff was silent under the fog, no waves crashing, no sound but the distant echo of wind and whispered names. And I realized fully that the isolation was not empty. The lighthouse had a memory. It remembered who had been here, who had vanished, who might vanish next. And for the first time, I wondered if I had already stepped into something that would not let me go. I turned toward the fog-shrouded path back to my car. My flashlight shook in my grip, but I forced my legs to move. The whisper was still there, a thread in the mist. Brushing my mind, faint but insistent. Elias. I didn't look back, but I could feel it, watching, waiting, patient. The fog seemed to follow, curling around me like a living thing. And somewhere deep in the distance, the lighthouse loomed, silent but aware, holding its secrets close. I didn't want to go back inside. The fog had swallowed the cliff almost entirely, and the lighthouse looked like a pale tooth stuck in the mist. But something in me pressed forward, the memory of the whisper lingering, almost guiding me up the spiral stairs again. The metal railing was cold, slick with condensation, my fingers leaving wet streaks as I gripped it. The chamber at the top seemed smaller now, tighter, as if the fog had pressed against the walls while I was away. I swept my flashlight over the rusted lamp, over the cracked glass, and my beam landed on a corner where a pile of yellowed papers lay stacked against the wall. They looked untouched, though dust clung to the edges. I crouched down, brushing them free, and realized it was a journal, its cover frayed, ink bleeding from decades of damp, the leather binding cracked like bark. The first page was scrawled in a hurried hand, the letters tilted and jagged like the keeper had written them while shaking. October 12, 1923, they have returned. I hear them moving through the fog, whispering my name. They watch when I sleep. I froze, the words pressed close to my chest as if the paper exhaled the cold air of the room. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment I thought I felt someone brush against my shoulder. I spun. Nothing. The fog outside remained a dense wall, unbroken. The next pages chronicled days blending into nights, the entries growing shorter, more frantic. November 1, they walked the spiral. I hear the steps echo behind me, soft, deliberate. I lock the doors, but it does not stop. They are patient. I flipped the page and my breath caught. The words described exactly what I had felt, the sense of being followed, watched, a presence that slipped along the stairs with me. I heard the whisper again, soft like a string plucked in the distance. Elia's. My heart leapt. I tried to steady my breath, reading on. The keeper's handwriting twisted more as the pages went forward. November 12. I see them in the glass. Shapes, shadows, moving when I am not looking. They know the lighthouse. They remember the fog. I glanced at the cracked window panes. The fog pressed close again, as though it had slid in around me while I was absorbed in the journal. I swallowed, pressing my hand to the railing for balance. The whisper came again, curling inside my ears. It wasn't the wind. Not now. The entries became increasingly fragmented, words jumbled, sentences broken. December 3. The fog is alive. I am not alone. They come in the night. I hear my name. I shivered, running my fingers along the page. Someone had chronicled their descent into fear. Their paranoia had been real, yet something more sinister lurked in the fog and shadows around this place. I felt it now, the weight of years, the ghosts of memory pressing in. A loud thump echoed from the spiral stairs below. I froze. My flashlight swung to the railing, empty. The sound had been deliberate, slow, not the building settling, not the wind. Footsteps. Someone or something was moving through the lighthouse unseen. I turned back to the journal, forcing my pulse to slow. December 15. I cannot sleep. They watch through the walls, through the fog, through my mind. I do not know how long I can remain here. They are patient. They remember my name. I read the words aloud, almost whispering, feeling the cold air vibrate with them. It was as if the keeper had never left, as if the journal itself held a fragment of him in the room. I ran my fingers over the ink. Some pages were smudged, as though someone had cried over them, or something had touched them after he had gone. A sudden scraping came from the corner of the lantern room, faint, slow. I whipped around. Nothing. The journal trembled slightly in my hand, though I was certain I held it tight. My skin crawled. The fog seemed thicker now, denser against the glass, curling like fingers reaching inside. I flipped another page. December 22. I have seen them in the lantern glass, my name on their lips. They move closer, always closer, waiting for me to call back. I hear footsteps in the fog. I hear them at the cliff edge. I swallowed, the hairs on my arms prickling. That sentence echoed in my mind. The keeper's paranoia was real, and so was whatever lingered here, patient and unseen, pressing through the fog decades later. A cold wind blew through a crack in the window, carrying a faint metallic scent. My flashlight flickered again. I thought I glimpsed a shadow slip past the upper stairs, but when I turned, the spiral was empty, the lighthouse silent except for the distant hum of fog pressing against the glass. December 29, I hear them whispering my name. The fog follows. They know when I am alone. I lock the doors. It does not stop. It never stops. I pressed my hand to my mouth. The words mirrored my own experience, my own rising terror, the whisper that now pressed inside my mind. Elia's. I flipped quickly, desperate for some resolution, some explanation. But the journal offered none. It ended abruptly, pages torn, ink smeared, as if the keeper had been interrupted mid-sentence. The last line was jagged, almost frantic. I am alone, but they. I dropped the journal into my lap, heart hammering. My flashlight trembled. The fog outside twisted, curling around the lighthouse like smoke from a fire I couldn't see. I thought I heard the stairs creak above me, slow and deliberate. The lighthouse itself seemed to lean in, listening, aware, patient. I forced myself to stand. The journal felt impossibly heavy in my hands, the weight of decades of fear, of memory pressing down. I traced the torn edges, feeling the pulse of history, the keeper's last moments bleeding through the paper. Another whisper grazed my ear, softer this time, almost like a sigh. Elia's. I froze. The sound seemed to originate from everywhere and nowhere, curling through the lantern room, brushing the walls, wrapping around me. My hands shook. I realized the journal hadn't just recorded fear, it had preserved it, held it. And now it was mine, a tether to something older than me, patient and watching. I slid the journal into my bag, careful not to drop it. Every instinct screamed to leave, to flee the fog, the cliff, the lighthouse. But I couldn't. The whisper followed me down the spiral stairs, soft, insistent, curling around the railing. Elia's come back. At the base, the lighthouse loomed above me, silent in appearance, yet alive in ways my mind could not grasp. The fog thickened, pressing against the door I had come through, mooting the cliff, swallowing the world beyond. I realized fully that leaving might not sever the connection. The keeper's fear had traveled through decades, through pages and ink, waiting for someone to hear, someone to remember. I stepped outside. The fog clung to me, heavy and damp, carrying the faint echo of whispers I could no longer place entirely in my mind or in the world around me. The cliff beneath seemed quieter, but the weight of the lighthouse pressed in, patient, aware. I looked back once. The tower's lantern, cracked and clouded, seemed to pulse faintly in the fog, as if acknowledging my presence, as if promising it would not let its story or its whispers die. And as I walked down the rocky path, boots slipping over wet stones, I realized the journal was more than a record. It was an invitation that I could not refuse. The fog had thickened overnight, curling around the cliff like a living thing. I stood at the edge, the lighthouse looming behind me, its cracked glass lantern dark, empty, yet somehow expectant. The journal from the keeper was tucked under my arm, its weight a constant reminder of someone else's fear. I hadn't meant to read every word, but the entries had clawed into my mind. Each phrase, each trembling sentence, felt like a finger tracing my spine. And then I saw it. A light far out at sea. Not the usual reflection of the moon on the waves, but a pale, steady glow bobbing as if carried on invisible currents. I squinted through the fog, but the beam of my flashlight barely penetrated the mist. The light moved, slow, deliberate, and then another appeared, flickering, almost mimicking the first. My stomach knotted. I had read about lighthouses and lanterns before, the way they warned sailors, kept ships from jagged rocks. But these lights were not signals. They seemed aware. They moved with intention, circling the rocks, edging closer to the cliff. The journal trembled in my hands, though I was certain I held it tight. I flipped to the last entry of the keeper. They came in the mist. I had a choice. I did not know which path would save me. I waited, and the fog remembered. A cold gust blew through the cliff, carrying the brine of the sea and something else, something metallic, sharp. I shivered, pressing my jacket closer, feeling the edges of reality blur. The fog swirled unnaturally around the lighthouse, thickening like smoke, muffling the sound of waves crashing below. It felt alive, patient, watching. I stepped closer to the cliff's edge. My boots scraped over wet stones. The lights shifted as if they had noticed me. Not mere movement, but recognition. The same instinct that had made the keeper pace his lantern room now gripped me. I was not meant to be here, yet I was compelled, drawn forward by the invisible thread that tied me to this place. The journal slipped open to a page I hadn't read before, though I knew I had thumbed through all of them. December 31, 1923. I cannot leave. The fog will follow. The lanterns will wait. I hear my name in the waves. I made a choice, and they remember. I swallowed, the words tangling in my throat. Choice. What choice? And the lanterns, what were they waiting for? A soft crunch behind me made my heart leap. I spun. Nothing. The lighthouse loomed silent, its metal spiral staircase coiled like a black snake, waiting. The fog pressed closer, stinging my eyes, clinging to my clothes. And then a whisper, barely audible over the wind, brushed against my ear. Elia's. I froze. The name felt old, worn, and yet full of intent. Someone or something was calling me. I could not tell if it came from the journal, the lighthouse, or the fog itself. I took a step back and the lights shifted again, closer now, moving as if following me. My instincts screamed to run, yet I couldn't tear my gaze away. My pulse pounded, the cold sinking deep into my bones. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. The mist, the lighthouse, the journal, they were all part of the same entity, alive in ways I could not yet understand. I opened the journal to the final pages. The handwriting was chaotic, desperate. I had to choose the lantern or the fog. One would take me. I do not know which, but I heard my name whispered as I stepped into the dark. I chose, and the sea remembered. The fog remembers. You will hear it too. The wind shifted, stronger now, carrying the scent of salt and rust. The lights moved again, closer, swaying in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. And then I understood. The keeper's choice had been a trap, a cycle. Whoever or whatever he had confronted had not ended. It waited. The journal had not preserved only his words but his fate, and now it reached for me. I stumbled back, nearly losing my footing on the slick stones. The fog wrapped around me, thick as wool, mooting the cliffs in waves. My flashlight flickered and died. Darkness pressed in from all sides, yet the lanterns persisted, bobbing gently, deliberately, tracing patterns I could not comprehend. They were alive, aware, patient. I realized I was hearing the waves differently now. Not the crash of water against rock, but something beneath it, a pulse, a low cadence almost like footsteps. Not behind me, not in front, but within the fog itself. Each wave whispered the keeper's name, each breath of wind carried fragments of his panic. A sudden shift, the lights paused, hovering just above the waterline as if considering me. I felt my knees weaken, my heart hammering against my ribcage. The fog seemed to lean closer, swallowing the cliff, curling around my legs. And then a single whisper, unmistakable, sharper this time. Elias, make your choice. Choice? I swallowed, my fingers curling around the journal as if it might shield me, protect me. But I understood I had no shield. There was no protection here. Only the lighthouse, the fog, and the lights. They waited, patient and alive. I took a step forward, compelled, drawn to the edge. The lights moved with me, mirroring my hesitation, tracing the arc of my movement. The journal trembled in my hand. I could feel the ink pulse under my fingers like it was alive. The keeper's final words rang in my ears. I chose, and the sea remembered. The fog remembers. You will hear it too. The wind gusted, nearly toppling me. I fell to my hands, scraping my palms on wet stone. And then I saw it, not the lights, but shadows behind the lights, flickering along the fog just beyond my vision. Shapes that twisted and coiled, almost human, almost remembering. They moved with the rhythm of the lanterns, synchronized, patient, deliberate. I scrambled back, chest heaving. My flashlight, barely working, cast a thin beam that trembled over the rocks. The shadows danced just beyond reach, teasing me, pressing against the edges of reason. The whispers rose, layering, overlapping, a chorus of fear. Elias, Elias. I realized then what the keeper had meant. The choice was never clear. One step wrong, one hesitation, and you became part of the fog, the lanterns, the whispers. The journal was a lure, a tether, and now it had me. I gripped it tight, feeling the ink burn faintly against my palms. The lights at sea moved closer, brighter, almost tangible now, bobbing above the black waves like eyes. And I knew they were not following me. They were waiting for me to step forward to respond. I did not move. I could not. The fog curled higher, twisting around me, cold and damp, pressing against my clothes, my skin. And yet I could not tear my eyes from the lanterns. Then a sudden realization. One of the lights paused directly in line with the lighthouse, as if testing me. And in that moment I understood the keeper had not fled. He had been claimed, consumed in some way by what he tried to face. The fog had preserved him, the lanterns carried him, and the journal had brought his voice forward. I dropped to my knees, breath ragged, gripping the journal. The whisper pierced through the roar of the waves. Elias, choose. The cliff felt impossibly high. The rocks jagged beneath, the fog pressing tighter, the lanterns waiting patiently. I could see them clearly now, flickering, glowing, moving with awareness. And I realized fully the final truth. The keeper had not warned me. He had invited me. The journal fell open to the last page. The ink was smudged, jagged, almost unreadable. I waited. They came. I chose the lantern. The fog remembered. You will hear it too. The whisper rose again, insistent, curling around my ears. Elia's. I could feel the fog, the lanterns, the waves. Alive, aware, patient. And I knew in some terrifying way that I had only just arrived. The stairs spiraled upward, metal worn smooth by decades of soles, yet each step groaned beneath me like the hull of a ship in storm. Sunset spilled across the horizon, a dying ember against the gray fog, but the light barely reached the top. I felt it even before I heard it, the presence, lingering in the corners, moving with the wind, heavy as the sea's salt on my skin. The journal was in my pocket, its pages pressed tight, the ink still alive in my imagination. Every word the keeper wrote echoed in my mind, gnawing at the edges of reason. I hear my name in the fog. I wait. I cannot leave. The tower watches. The tower, I understood now. Not just the building, not just the lighthouse, but the spiral itself. Each turn, each rung of metal carried memory. It carried him. And now me. A faint moan brushed against my ear, so delicate I first thought it was the wind. Then it rose, layered, anguished, as if multiple voices merged into one. It wasn't a scream, not exactly. More like fragments of screams, clipped and incomplete, echoing and crashing against the walls like the waves below. I froze mid-step. My hand hovered over the railing, gripping the cold iron as if it could anchor me to reality. Who is here? My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the tower. The journal pressed a warning into my chest. The moans coalesced into words, broken and unintelligible at first, then clear in the spaces between my own heartbeat. Don't leave, stay, please. I climbed faster, propelled by curiosity and dread. The sunset faded into a dull, dim light, leaving the spiral wrapped in shadow. Every step upward brought a new twist of sensation. The salt in my hair, the hiss of the fog pressing through cracks, the subtle vibration in the metal underfoot, like the tower itself was breathing. Halfway up I glimpsed it, a figure in the corner of my eye, pale as sea foam, standing at a landing I had just passed. When I turned, nothing remained, but the air felt colder, heavier. I realized then that the tower did not want me to look directly. It wanted me to feel, to understand through instinct and unease. A gust of wind slammed the tower door below, rattling the spirals like a distant drum. The cries grew louder, layered now with subtle, almost human laughter, fragile and brittle. My pulse spiked. I gripped the railing with both hands, fingernails biting into the metal. The journal, now trembling in my pocket, seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as my heart. I reached a small landing. The light from outside thinning. A single, fractured beam illuminated the tower's interior. Walls scratched with the keeper's desperate markings, spirals etched deep, repeating, endless. His words carved into metal and stone. I cannot leave. They wait. They follow. I chose. I stepped closer to the wall, tracing the scratches with my fingers. They were old, rusted over, but still jagged. I could feel the echo of his panic, the residue of a man trapped between choice and inevitability. And then I heard it, my name whispered, softer than fog on water, Elia's. I spun, expecting the figure, but there was nothing. Only the fog pressing against the tower windows, the sea crashing below, and the journal in my pocket, vibrating faintly. I kept climbing. Each step felt heavier, the air thicker, as though the tower itself weighed on me. The cries shifted now, blending seamlessly with the roar of the ocean. I could no longer tell if they came from above, below, inside, or all around me. My mind spun, senses tangled in layers of sound and shadow. Halfway to the lantern room, I paused, gripping the railing. The journal fell open on its own, pages splaying like wings. Words I had never seen scrawled themselves across the margins. They hear you. You are their echo. The choice is not yours. The tower pulsed with that revelation. I felt it, not the metal, not the stone, but a subtle heartbeat underfoot in the walls around me. The keeper's fate, the lanterns, the fog, and now the spiral tower. They were all connected, feeding, waiting. I forced another step. The light from outside disappeared entirely, leaving only the dim reflection of the fading sun in the fog. I reached the top landing. The door to the lantern room stood closed, heavy, blackened, untouched by time, yet impossibly solid as though guarding some final truth. I pressed my hand to it. The metal was cold but not inert. It vibrated faintly, humming with the same pulse that had run through the journal, through the tower, through me. The cries crescendoed, blending with the wind and waves, now distinctly urging, pleading, "Elias, come see no." I wanted to step back to run, but a compulsion rooted me in place. The journal trembled in my hand. I could almost hear the keeper's voice, layered over mine, layered over the wind. I chose, and the fog remembers. The door shivered under my palm, faint scratches forming along its surface, like nails clawing from within. And then a realization struck. This was not just the keeper's fate. It was a warning, a mirror. Whoever faced the lighthouse, the fog, the tower became part of it, became the echo. I backed away, heart hammering, pressed my forehead against the railing. Below me, the fog shifted, thickened, curling around the cliff, swallowing the waves in a pale, pulsating sheet. And above me, the cries intensified, human anguish twisting into something older, something hungry. A shadow passed across the landing behind me. I turned, but there was nothing, only the fog pressing closer to the tower, moving unnaturally, aware. My mind raced. The journal had guided me here, shown me pieces, but I could not predict the final shape of this place. Not yet. The cries began to merge with words I almost recognized, fractured sentences. "Do not leave. The tower knows. The lantern waits." Each syllable twisted in my mind, bending the sound of the wind into meaning. My fingers tightened around the journal. I felt the keeper's terror, his surrender, his inevitability. And then a pause. Silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of resistance. The fog settled briefly, the cries stilled, and I realized I could hear my own heartbeat echoing against the walls. A microcosm of the sea, the wind, the tower, all paused, waiting for the next move. I glanced at the door again. Faint scratches etched across it now spelled something new. "Your turn." I swallowed hard. The journal vibrated, hot against my palm, whispering in words that weren't there before. "Elias, do you choose?" The wind shifted again, carrying the cries, now intertwined with laughter, soft, brittle, human, but impossibly distant. And I understood, the keeper had not vanished. He had been absorbed, merged with the tower, the fog, the sea. He had become the echo. And now, in climbing these steps and holding this journal, I was on the same path. I staggered backward, the stairs feeling suddenly vertical, endless. The fog pressed closer, curling into the tower, into the spiral, into me. The cries returned, louder, now accompanied by whispers I could not place. "Do not leave, stay, choose." I gripped the railing, knuckles white. The door to the lantern room remained closed, yet I could feel the weight behind it, the presence, the inevitability. The keeper's despair, his choice, his absorption. It pressed against me, not physically, but in a way that made my own skin crawl. I could step forward, open the door, and confront the lanterns, the fog, the tower. Or I could turn back, retreat down the spiral, and know that the whispers, the fog, the cries would follow me, dragging me back eventually. The sunset had vanished completely. Darkness filled the spiral now, muted only by the pale glow of the fog outside. The cries swelled, fading in and out, a rhythm, a tide, and I felt my heartbeat synchronize with it. I realized fully that there was no true escape. The tower, the fog, the lanterns, they were patient. They waited, aware, alive in a way I could feel in every bone. And the journal had not merely recorded the keeper's fate. It had passed it forward. The wind whipped against the tower, shrieking now. Or maybe it was just me, screaming in my mind. The last thing I saw before I forced myself to step back down was the door to the lantern room vibrating slightly, faint scratches appearing along the edge. You will hear it too. I descended slowly, the spiral seemingly longer with each step. The cries softened, retreating with me, but the echo lingered in my bones. The fog outside thinned slightly, revealing the dark swell of the sea below, yet the weight of the tower pressed from above, from within, from all around. And I knew as I reached the bottom landing that climbing the spiral had not freed me from the lighthouse, from the keeper, from the fog. I had become part of its memory, its echo, and the cries would follow me, patient, deliberate, waiting for the next choice. The journal trembled in my hand one last time, whispering words I could not yet hear but would never forget. The tower knows. The fog remembers. The lantern waits. I stepped outside. The fog enveloped me instantly, thick and alive. The sea crashed, echoing my heartbeat, echoing his, echoing the tower itself. And for the first time I understood. The lighthouse was not abandoned. It never had been. The fog was thick enough to swallow sound, pressing against my ears before it touched my eyes. Platform 9 3/4, or at least that's what the old signs claimed, rusted and peeling. No one walked here anymore. The rails gleamed wet and empty under the pale glow of the lamps, the benches slick with condensation, each one screaming of abandonment. I stepped forward, boots crunching softly against the gravel. Something made the hair on my neck prickle. The train tracks stretched into a white haze, endless, and yet I felt eyes on me, as though the mist itself watched, curious, patient. Then I saw it, a train car, half shimmering, half solid, as if reality had forgotten how to hold it. Its paint was dark, impossible to name, neither black nor brown, more like the absence of light. The windows were opaque, reflecting nothing, swallowing any idea of what might be inside. I froze. Locals whispered about this car, that it appeared only for a chosen few, that it moved without steam, without wheels, appearing and vanishing like smoke through the cracks of memory. I had always chalked it up to myth, until now. The air shifted. A faint hum vibrated through the platform, low and deliberate like a pulse under the fog. I could feel it in my chest before I heard it, subtle but persistent. My boots dragged on the gravel, each step amplified in the fog, and the hum became a voice. Or maybe the voice had been there all along, hiding beneath the mist. I moved closer. The platform seemed to elongate beneath me, the rails curling into the fog as though bending toward some impossible horizon. And then the train car moved, or I couldn't tell. It shifted slightly, the metal whispering against air in a way that made me dizzy. I stumbled, reaching for a bench to steady myself, but the fog thickened, curling around me, almost alive. I thought I saw a figure inside the car, reflected in the glass that wasn't glass. Nothing concrete, just the suggestion of someone or something waiting, watching. I pressed my face closer. The reflection changed, like water, like smoke. My own eyes stared back, but not my own voice answered. A faint tapping started behind me, quick, uneven. Not mechanical, but deliberate. I spun. The platform was empty. The lamp swayed with a cold draft, casting long, wavering shadows, yet the fog pressed closer, curling around the rails and benches, nudging me toward the train. I felt my pulse rise. Every instinct told me to step back, to retreat to safety, but curiosity anchored me. The car existed in a different rhythm, one that ignored the laws of physics and patience alike. Its doors remained shut, yet I could sense movement inside, faint, deliberate, as though it were breathing in time with the hum under my chest. A whisper passed through the mist. I couldn't make it out at first, too soft, too fragmented, but it tugged at the edges of memory like a half-remembered name or a dream I'd almost forgotten. Come. It breathed into the fog, curling around my throat, making the hair on my arms rise. The ground beneath my feet felt wrong, too soft in one spot, too firm in another, like the platform had been rebuilt over a memory I wasn't meant to touch. I took a hesitant step forward. The car shimmered again, moving imperceptibly closer. And then, for the briefest instant, I thought I saw faces pressed against the opaque windows. Not friendly, not human. Just eyes, empty yet accusing, staring straight at me. The tapping grew louder behind me. I spun again. The fog formed shapes, impossible, angular, like rails folding into the air, twisting around the lamps. My own reflection in the nearest window shivered as though the glass were alive, aware of my presence. A sudden memory hit me, buried deep in childhood. Stories of platforms that existed only in whispers, of cars that chose their passengers, of travelers who vanished and returned changed. I had never believed them. Now, under the gray light of this forsaken platform, I understood. Disbelief offered no protection here. I reached the edge of the car. My hand hovered over the door handle, fingers trembling. The hum under my ribs grew, resonating with something older, deeper. It was no longer just a train. It was a doorway, a threshold, a pulse in the fabric of the platform itself. And it wanted something. I heard a faint echo, like a footstep on metal coming from inside the mist. Not mine. Not any step I could have made. A rhythm that didn't match reality. I stepped back, heart hammering, pressing my palm to my forehead, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then the door shivered. Not opened, not moved, just vibrated slightly. My reflection rippled in the window as though the surface were liquid. I could see shapes inside now, fleeting, shadows moving in impossible directions, bending space around them but never touching the glass. One figure seemed almost human, pale and elongated, pressing a hand against the foggy pane. A laugh, or was it a whisper, rose from the mist. Low, knowing, cruel. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe properly. The world felt wrong. The rails stretched endlessly, the lamps flickered like dying stars, and the platform itself seemed to lean, urging me toward the car. I stumbled backward, bumping into a bench. The mist curled around my legs, binding me, guiding me, whispering my name in fragments. Elias, come, step, choose my own name, carried in the wind, in the pulse, in the hum. Something shifted inside the car, a motion too quick for comprehension. A blink and it was gone. I could feel it observing, waiting, aware of my hesitation. And then a new sensation. Fear, yes, but also a strange pull, magnetic and inevitable. My hand itched to touch the door again, to step through, to see. I glanced down the platform. Empty. Nothing. Just fog curling over wet stones, bending the light, swallowing the rails. But the mist was alive with possibility, whispering, teasing, promising secrets and terror in the same breath. I could leave. I could run. But I knew somehow that leaving might be impossible once I had seen it, once I had been chosen. The air grew colder. My breath fogged, swirling in clouds that mingled with the fog of the platform, indistinguishable. The train car remained, impossible and patient, humming in resonance with something inside me, something I could not name. I took another step forward. My boots crunched against the gravel. The fog thickened. I felt it press against my skin, seep into my clothes, curl around my chest, reminding me with every pulse that this place was alive, aware, waiting. The shadows in the windows shifted again, faces fleeting, impossible. The whispers became words. Step inside, stay, remember, words I almost knew but could not place. My head spun, chest tight, mind stretching across time and space, trying to make sense of something beyond comprehension. I reached the door again, hand hovering, trembling. The hum was now a chorus, low and deliberate, weaving with the pulse of the rails, the fog, the platform itself. My own heartbeat matched it. I realized in that instant that stepping through would not just be entering a train. It would be stepping into a memory, a possibility, a choice I could not reverse. The mist thickened, curling under my boots, around my knees. I felt the weight of countless eyes, patient and invisible, watching me decide. The echoes of travelers passed, whispered warnings, fractured laughter, all pressed against my mind like the tide. The door shivered again, and I understood. It was waiting for me, not just to enter, but to accept its pull, to be claimed by the platform and the car. I took a deep breath, fog curling into my lungs, cold and wet. A final glance along the empty rails, the lamps swaying, the platform stretching into impossible distance. And then I stepped closer, hand brushing the door. The shimmer of the car pulsed beneath my fingers, alive, patient, waiting for the choice I could no longer deny. I could feel it. The car, the platform, the fog. They were not separate. They were one, and now I was a part of it, the next echo in a chain I could neither understand nor escape. The mist pressed tighter, the hum enveloped me completely, and the whispers, fractured but persistent, carried my name into the fog. Elia's welcome. I swallowed. The world tilted, rails folding into the mist, the platform bending, and I understood fully. Stepping through the door would change everything. And yet, the pull was irresistible. I reached for the handle. The fog swallowed my hand first. The door groaned under my hand, cold metal vibrating against my fingers, as though it were reluctant to let me in or eager. The air inside smelled of damp wood and iron, old enough to make my lungs itch. A faint fog lingered, curling along the floor, brushing my ankles like a timid hand. I stepped in, the door swinging shut behind me with a soft click that seemed far too final. Inside, the car stretched impossibly long. Faded seats lined each side, torn fabric revealing decades of cushioning, patterns half swallowed by dust. Sunlight, or what little broke through the fog outside, fell in dull stripes, catching motes of dust like a frozen storm. The windows reflected nothing, just an emptiness that made me uneasy. At the front, on a small folding desk, lay a ledger. Its leather cover was cracked, brittle, edges curling with age. The pages yellowed and frayed. I moved closer, fingers hovering over it. Something about the book made my heart beat faster, not fear exactly, but recognition, a whisper at the edge of memory. The first page I opened listed names. Passenger after passenger, ink fatting, letters curling into the paper like the fog outside. I traced a finger along the names. H. Greaves, M. Linton, J. Carraway. Each name felt weighty, as if the people behind them had left more than a mark on paper. They were absent, gone. I leaned back slightly, trying to shake the sensation that the car itself was alive, breathing quietly beneath the floorboards. A low creak answered me. My eyes darted along the seats. Nothing moved, but a cold prickle ran down my spine. The ledger seemed to pulse under my fingertips, a heartbeat that wasn't mine. Turning the page, I noticed something strange. The names repeated but subtly changed. Slight shifts in spelling, letters curling differently, some crossed out. A small note appeared beside a few. Returned, incomplete. The ink was sharp here, almost new, as if someone or something was still writing. I glanced up at the seats. The car felt smaller now, walls bending subtly inward, the ceiling lowering, yet I could see further down than seemed possible. Shadows pooled in corners, soft, deep, almost comforting at first. And then shapes began to move. Not fully formed, just hints, shoulders, heads shifting in the corner of my vision, disappearing when I turned. A whisper drifted past me, almost beneath the hum of the car. Choose again, step, and my heart skipped. I spun toward the desk. The ledger trembled slightly, pages fluttering as though blown by a silent wind. I reached to steady it, and for the briefest moment, a name leapt off the page. My own, written in the same curling, careful script. I jerked back, staring. The page was blank again, ink fatting, leaving only the paper beneath. A laugh, a dry, scraping sound like fingernails on stone echoed faintly, vibrating in my chest. I swallowed. The car had settled, quiet now, but the air hummed with expectancy, like it had been holding its breath for me. I moved down the aisle slowly, trying to keep my steps quiet, though every shift of weight seemed amplified. Faded seats bore the impressions of people long gone. I touched one. Cold. Empty. The fog brushed my hands, curling around my wrists, tugging gently as though guiding me somewhere. The ledger called again. I turned back. The pages fluttered wildly now, flipping themselves as if impatient. Names scrolled past in a blur. L. Harrow, F. Winslow, T. Kelman. All crossed out eventually, leaving only faint ghost marks. Every name had vanished from official records, erased as though they had never existed. Yet here they were, preserved in this car, waiting for the next traveler. I shivered. My fingers hovered over the desk, half wanting to close it, half unable to look away. A whisper slid into my mind, soft, insistent. "Do you want to ride or leave?" My pulse raced. The words were not spoken aloud, but they pressed against my thoughts like smoke. Then the lights in the car flickered. The fog condensed slightly, curling into shapes, figures hunched over seats, hands pressed to faces, shadows shifting like they had weight. None moved toward me, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Every hair on my arm stood prickling, and I realized the car wasn't empty. Not truly. It never had been. I flipped another page of the ledger. The names continued, decades of travelers. Some repeated after long gaps. Some had tiny symbols beside them I couldn't decipher, spirals and slashes. And then I noticed something. One name appeared with a date next to it, yesterday. Impossible. I leaned closer. The ink was fresh, bleeding into the page like it was still wet. My fingers brushed it, cold. The page shivered like it had lungs, like it drew in air. My chest tightened. The fog shifted around the seats, curling closer, almost protective, or maybe predatory. A low hum rose from beneath the floorboards, vibrating up through my boots. It synced with my heartbeat. I wanted to step back to run, but my feet felt heavy, glued to the warped wooden floor. The hum became a whisper, not one voice, but many, layered, overlapping. Names, demands, suggestions, warnings. Step forward, read, remember, stay. I glanced at the window. Outside, the fog had thickened, swirling against the car as though trying to push its way in. The train platform had vanished. I wasn't sure if the car was moving or the world around it had shifted. My reflection in the glass stared back at me, pale and wide-eyed. But the reflection wasn't mine for a moment. Its lips moved silently, mouthing the names in the ledger. I turned back to the desk. Another page. A single name stood alone. It trembled, ink quivering as though alive. Elias R. I stumbled back. My chest heaved. I didn't remember writing it, didn't remember seeing it before. But I knew deep in some corner of thought I didn't trust that it was mine. I had been chosen, recorded, sealed in this car with the others. The fog thickened further. My vision narrowed to the ledger and the seats surrounding me. Shadows pooled in corners, shapes bending, stretching. I felt pressure in the air, like lungs pressing down on me, gentle but relentless. The whispering grew louder, more coherent. Step inside, don't leave, never leave. I realized then that the car itself was alive, not in the mechanical sense, but in memory, in presence. Every name, every imprint, every erased record fed into it, a living archive of passengers who had crossed thresholds and vanished. And now I was part of it, or about to be. The ledger trembled one last time. Pages flipped faster, names spilling across the paper, blanking out as soon as they were read. I understood. Time was different here. What passed inside this car could not be measured by outside clocks. I could stay or I could leave, but either choice would bind me. I stepped closer. The fog curled around my ankles, tugging, pulling insistently. My hand hovered over the desk again. The names stared at me. Some eyes seemed to peer from the paper itself, accusing, inviting, warning. The whispers pressed in, names layered upon names. A sudden clarity hit me. The ledger was not just a record, it was a mirror. Every passenger who had vanished had left a trace, a memory, a warning. And every visitor like me was measured against it. My choice was not whether to ride, but whether to accept that I was already riding, whether I could escape a record that had begun writing the moment I saw the car. I backed away slowly, eyes never leaving the ledger. The fog shifted with me, pooling between seats, pressing against my legs. My heart hammered, but the whispering quieted, drawing me in still. The car waited, patient, alive, and infinite. I touched a name lightly, cold ink living in some impossible way. The fog swirled tighter. A voice, sharp and clear this time, cut through the whispers. Elia's choose. And I understood. The ledger was not optional. The car was not optional. The names were not forgotten. They were warnings, invitations, curses, and now so was mine. I swallowed, hand trembling. Step forward and the car would take me, record me, fold me into its story. Step back and the fog itself would follow, remembering, whispering, pulling, waiting for the next moment of weakness. The aisle seemed to stretch, the seats bending toward me. Shadows formed faces, pleading, accusing, patient. I took a hesitant step closer. The ledger quivered under my fingertips and I felt it. A pulse, a heartbeat of something ancient, patient, knowing. The fog pressed into the car like water, carrying whispers of names, faces, disappearances. I could leave, I realized. But the ledger called. The seats, the fog, the whispers, they all called. And in the pulse under my chest, I knew that stepping away would be harder than stepping in. I reached for the page, my fingers brushing ink that was alive, that had been waiting for me. The whispers hushed, a soft sigh vibrating through the car, almost approval, almost hunger. I understood then that the journey wasn't outside, but inside, that the ledger, the names, the car, they were all part of the same living memory. And I, inevitable, was next. The moment the train lurched forward, I realized it made no sound. No chugging wheels, no rattling tracks, nothing but the faint hum of air pressing against the windows. Outside, the fog had thickened to a solid wall, and the platform I had stood on was gone. My stomach turned. I had expected departure to feel like movement, but this was something else. The seats stretched before me in long, endless rows, fading into darkness. Shadows pooled at the far ends, curling along the walls, reaching toward the floor like black liquid. I tried to look back at the ledger to ground myself, but it had vanished from the desk. It was as if it had never been there, like it had been a lure, a trap. My hand hovered in midair where the leather cover had rested, trembling. Figures appeared then, half-formed, standing in the aisle. At first I thought they were passengers, but the closer I looked, the more impossible it became. Their eyes reflected nothing, deep black pits, and their mouths moved silently, mouthing words I could not hear. They weren't sitting and they weren't walking, they were just waiting, watching. I forced myself to move forward, gripping the back of a seat for balance. The hum beneath the floorboards pulsed in sync with my heartbeat. It seemed to whisper secrets just beyond hearing. The fog inside the car swirled, twisting with intent, brushing against my ankles, tugging at my clothing. Every step felt heavier, as if I were wading through some unseen current. I reached the first window and pressed my hand against the cold glass. Outside, darkness stretched infinitely. Then faint shapes flickered in the distance, tiny lanterns bobbing as if on water, moving in strange patterns. They followed us, or maybe we followed them. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, pale and wide-eyed, but behind my own reflection, a figure crouched, tilting its head, eyes locked on mine. I jerked back. The aisle seemed to stretch, bending in impossible ways. The seats warped, elongating, shadows pooling along the edges. I could hear something faint, like whispers bouncing off metal and wood. Not one voice, but many layered, overlapping, insistently nomming things I didn't understand. Stay, leave, remember, disappear. I stumbled toward the next car, compelled by curiosity I couldn't resist. Each step pressed a weight against my chest, a gravity that wasn't mine. My hand touched the door handle, and I realized it was ice cold, slick with condensation that wasn't there a moment ago. I opened it, and the next car was empty, or at least it looked empty. The fog was thicker here, coiling in spirals along the floor. It moved with intent, curling toward the far wall as if leading me somewhere. A seat creaked behind me. I spun. No one was there, but the shadows had shifted. Figures stood along the aisle, motionless, faces hidden. I could feel their attention, heavy and unyielding. One of them raised a hand, almost delicately, pointing toward the next car. I swallowed, unsure whether it was invitation or threat. My reflection in the window twisted, a faint smile curling across lips that weren't mine. I stepped forward and the air changed. The hum beneath the train grew louder, resonating in my chest, in my skull, vibrating through every bone. The whispers became coherent, sharp, teasing, almost conversational. You see now, don't you? They never leave. I froze. The thought hit me with a cold, sudden clarity. Every passenger I had glimpsed in the ledger, every figure I had felt brush against my awareness, every name I had traced, it wasn't just record keeping. It was binding. Everyone who entered this car, who accepted its silent invitation, became part of it. They were here, always, just beyond perception, folded into the train's memory. A lantern flickered in the fog outside the window. It drew closer, hovering at my eye level. I pressed my forehead against the glass. Through the fog I could make out faces, shadowed, impossible, yet unmistakably human, watching. Not random, but intent. I felt them measuring me, assessing me, waiting for me to make a choice I didn't know I had. The whispers grew louder, now pressing against my thoughts rather than my ears. Step closer, join, ride. Remain, never leave. The words weren't spoken. They were poured directly into my mind. I stumbled back, hands shaking as I gripped the seat. My reflection in the window wavered, ghosting, multiple images overlaying each other. Faces of people I didn't know, all staring at me. I turned to the aisle. The seats warped, shadows pooling in impossible angles, forming shapes that suggested bodies crouched, crawling, waiting. I could hear faint movements beneath the floor, like tiny feet scuttling in the darkness. Not a sound of machinery, something organic, something alive. I realized then that the train moved not along tracks but through time, or something like it. The ledger had hinted at this, the erased names, the vanished passengers. Movement here wasn't linear. To ride was to enter a space where beginnings and endings folded into one another, and departure was an illusion. A figure emerged from the fog, solid this time. Dressed in the uniform of a conductor, hat sharp, coat pressed, face pale, eyes hollow. It walked slowly, deliberately, and each step echoed in the empty car as if calling out through the walls themselves. My breath caught. I wanted to speak, to ask who they were, but the words died in my throat. The figure stopped in front of me. Its eyes, hollow and black, bore into mine. I felt exposure, like every secret I'd ever tried to hide was suddenly written across my face. It tilted its head slowly, silently. Then it gestured down the aisle toward a seat. Compulsion pressed on me from all directions. The hum, the whispers, the fog, guiding me, insisting, demanding. I sat. The seat felt warmer than it should, the leather soft, yielding. The fog curled around me like a blanket. The conductor raised a hand, motioning toward the window. I looked. Outside, the lanterns had multiplied, dozens of them bobbing in the darkness, forming patterns almost deliberate. They weren't following, they were converging, circling the train, converging on this very car, this very moment. I wanted to stand, to run, to escape the weight pressing against my chest, but I couldn't. The shadows shifted again, pooling at the end of the car, forming shapes of seated passengers, their faces obscured, yet somehow familiar. I recognized the tilt of a head, the curve of a shoulder. They were waiting for me, waiting for confirmation that I belonged here. The hum beneath the train grew into a vibration, resonant and steady. It pulsed in time with my heartbeat, and I understood. I had become part of it already, whether I chose to sit or not. The conductor raised a hand again, then vanished into the fog, leaving only the weight of attention, the silent insistence of the waiting passengers. I pressed my hands to the window. My reflection wavered again, multiplied, and in each version the eyes stared back, unblinking, demanding recognition. Lanterns outside pulsed, and in their glow I saw faces pressed close to the glass, watching me intently. Not threatening, not welcoming, just watching. Every name I had read in the ledger flickered through my mind, a procession of silent witnesses. I realized then that leaving the car would not free me. The train, the fog, the shadows, they followed those who entered, carrying pieces of them. Every passenger's departure was a misdirection. They remained in memory, in presence, in influence. And now I was counted among them, an echo in the silent machinery, bound to the rhythm of the train. The whispering ceased for a heartbeat, then returned, layered and insistent. Elia's, remember, remain, ride. I understood that this car was alive with memory, with choice, with inevitability. It did not care about consent. It only required acknowledgement. I leaned back, fog curling around my shoulders, lanterns bobbing outside, shadows pooling at every corner. My reflection fractured across the window, overlaying itself with every passenger who had come before. I was seated among them, yet isolated, aware, conscious. I would move forward through the train, through time, through the spaces between, always watched, always counted, always part of the record. And in the last flicker of lantern light, I saw them clearly. Figures pressed close to the glass, watching me, observing my every heartbeat. Not one of them moved, not one of them spoke. They simply waited, patient and endless, for the moment I realized that the journey had no end. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. It hung in the fog, thick and heavy, dissipating slowly. The train continued forward silently, inevitably. And I knew deep down that whatever lay ahead was not a destination but a repetition, a continuation, a record of those who had come before. The lanterns outside flickered once more, and in their glow the figures' eyes met mine. I would never leave this train. I would always be remembered here in the fog, in the car, among the passengers who had disappeared. And yet, there was something else, a presence I hadn't noticed before, hovering at the edge of perception, waiting. And that presence was patient. The gates groaned before I even touched them. Rust flaked under my fingers, sharp and stubborn, as if warning me back. The hinges squealed a long, drawn-out note, like the wail of someone who'd been waiting for decades. I pushed, and the gates resisted for a heartbeat, then gave way, revealing the path inside. The hospital stood beyond, a hulking silhouette in the half-light. Windows stared like empty eyes, frames jagged where glass had shattered. The air smelled of decay, dust, and something older, something like forgotten screams. I stepped onto the cracked walkway, each footfall stirring motes that danced in the faint sun filtering through grimy panes. I didn't know what drew me here. Curiosity, obsession, the kind of thing that whispers you toward places everyone else avoids. I wanted to see it, to feel it, to know what lingered in the corners where no one had lived for years. Inside, the front doors hung slightly ajar. I pushed one and felt it resist, then shiver as it moved. The lobby stretched before me, the floor mottled with years of grime. Faded lines where people once walked marked the tiles, and I imagined the echo of shoes, the clack of heels, the shuffle of anxious feet. Nothing moved now except the dust in the slanting light. I traced a hand along a railing. The metal was cold, sticky in patches, like it remembered something it shouldn't. Paint peeled in long strips, curling away like dead skin. A faint smell of mildew crept through my nose, mixed with something sweet like antiseptic or old medicine. I swallowed hard. I was alone, but the silence pressed against me like a living thing. Hallways branched out, twisted and narrow, doors hanging open or missing entirely. Each room had its own scent of memory. One smelled like faint perfume, floral and cloying. Another smelled of rusted metal and bleach. I moved carefully, not wanting to disturb anything, though I had the sinking feeling it didn't matter. Whatever lingered here was already disturbed. A chair lay on its side in the corner of one room, legs snapped, cushion torn. I imagined someone throwing it or falling into it. Faded drawings covered the walls, childlike sketches, faces with too large eyes, too wide mouths. They stared at me, blank and accusing. My stomach churned. I wanted to step back, but my feet didn't obey. I found a room that had been a nurse's station. Files were strewn across the floor, papers brittle, edges curled with age. I bent to pick one up, careful not to tear it. Names, dates, brief notes in shaky handwriting. Some had marks, symbols I didn't understand. Others were smudged beyond recognition. Each sheet whispered fragments of lives, fragments of pain. One entry caught my eye. Voices in the walls, they call to me at night. I cannot sleep, I cannot leave. The words made the hair on my arms rise. Someone here had heard them too, the voices, the calls, my pulse quickened. I told myself it was nothing, that the mind plays tricks in silence, in dust, in rooms abandoned by the living. but the air felt heavier, thicker, and for a heartbeat I thought I heard it, a soft whisper too faint to catch, like a word carried on the edge of hearing. I pressed on down a long corridor. Light fell in shafts through broken windows, illuminating debris. A shoe, a rusted bed frame, a medical tray tipped over, its contents long gone. I imagined the patients here, their shadows flickering against these walls, the echoes of laughter or screams or muttered prayers. The silence was complete, yet it buzzed with a tension I couldn't name. I paused at a stairwell, steps crumbled, railing loose. I didn't want to go up, and yet I had to. Something drew me. I stepped carefully, each footfall echoing in the hollow shaft. Dust rose, hanging in the air like frozen smoke. And then I heard it again, a creak above me. Not the stair, not the floorboards, something else, deliberate, moving. My hand shot to the railing, my heart hammered. The second floor was narrower, corridors twisting like they were never meant for visitors. Doors were jammed or warped. One led to what had been a patient's room. A bed frame leaned against the wall, mattress missing, but a faint impression remained in the dust. I knelt, brushing the dust with a trembling hand, and saw the shape of someone curled there, the faint outline of a body that had long gone. A shiver ran down my spine. I could feel eyes on me. I knew I shouldn't, but I turned. Hallways stretched endlessly empty, but I sensed a presence behind each shadow, along every wall. Something patient, waiting. I swallowed and pressed forward, curiosity mingled with dread. The air grew colder, carrying whispers I couldn't catch, a soft susurration brushing my ears, fading when I turned my head. I stumbled into a room that had been a recreation area. Broken furniture, faded toys scattered across the floor. A small rocking horse leaned at an odd angle, rocking slightly, though no wind stirred. I froze. The sound of creaking filled the silence for a heartbeat. My mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no one here, yet the horse moved again, deliberate, slow, almost mocking. A door at the far end of the room hung crooked, the frame splitting with rot. I approached, the floor groaning beneath my weight. Inside was a small office, papers stacked in haphazard piles. One file rested atop the heap, edges blackened as if scorched. I opened it carefully. Patient logs, notes on treatments, medication schedules. Most entries mundane, clinical, but one caught my eye. He watches the corridors, smiles in the shadows. I hear him laugh when I pass. I drop the file, stepping back. My own shadow stretched long across the wall, flickering in the weak light. I turned, half expecting someone to be there, but nothing. The silence pressed down again, suffocating, insistent. I moved toward the door, trying to shake the unease, telling myself I was alone, that nothing here was real. A sudden sound, faint but unmistakable. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, above me. The floorboards on the upper level groaned as if someone or something walked the corridor in perfect rhythm with my heartbeat. I froze. Could it be another explorer? Or had I disturbed something that had waited for decades in this building? The thought made my skin crawl. I forced myself to move, climbing a narrow staircase, careful with every step. Dust fell, motes swirling in the weak sunlight. The hallway at the top was darker, windows broken, curtains shredded, flapping faintly. I pressed onward. The air smelled of mildew and something coppery sharp. My throat went dry. A low moan rose from somewhere distant, barely audible, yet unmistakable. It wasn't wind. It wasn't echo. It was a voice, weak, pained, calling through the walls. The corridors twisted, doors opening into rooms that seemed familiar and foreign at once. A patient's room. The bed was stripped bare, mattress gone. A chair overturned, paint peeling. I knelt, brushing the dust. Something shifted in the corner of my eye. A shape fleeting, gone when I looked directly. My pulse raced. I wanted to leave, wanted to run, but my feet kept moving, drawn forward by a mix of fear and irresistible curiosity. A final door led to what must have been the director's office. The air here was heavier, stale, thick with decay. Papers littered the floor, books torn and water-stained. I ran my hand across the desk. Deep scratches etched into the wood, names, dates, perhaps pleas. Something scratched across my mind, urgent and faint, leave. Do not stay. Do not look. I turned to the window, peering through grime. The ground stretched beyond, overgrown, forgotten. yet alive with shadows that shifted unnaturally. I felt watched, understood that the hospital had kept its eyes open for decades, waiting for intruders like me. The sun dipped lower, casting long, grotesque shadows across the walls, and I realized I wasn't just walking through history. I was stepping into the echoes of lives that had never left, that lingered in the dust, in the peeling paint, in the hollow corridors. A faint laugh echoed, high-pitched, distant, coming from the very walls. I froze. The building had a pulse, and I had felt it now, vibrating through the floor, into my chest, into my spine. I understood then that curiosity had a price, and something in me whispered that leaving would not undo what I had touched, what I had awakened in the silent, watchful halls of this place. I stepped back toward the staircase, toward the lower floors, toward the gates that groaned behind me. Dust swirled around my feet, catching in the slanting light, the particles moving almost with intent. And I knew, even before reaching the lobby, that the hospital would remember me. My name might never be written anywhere, but it would exist in its memory, echoing through the corridors, in the shadows, in the silence. And somewhere deep in the distance, a door creaked open on its own, slow, deliberate, inviting me back. The corridors stretched before me, narrow and dim, swallowing the weak light from the broken windows. Each step echoed, thin and brittle, against walls that had absorbed decades of fear. I wanted to convince myself I was imagining it, that the whispers I thought I heard were nothing more than the wind through cracks in the building. But they weren't the wind. They were voices, soft, urgent, half-formed words that trembled on the edge of hearing. I paused, pressing my back to the wall. The first whisper brushed against my ear, almost familiar, almost pleading. I turned sharply, but the hallway remained empty. Dust floated in the slanting light, moving as if alive, tracing invisible currents. My pulse hammered, each beat loud enough to drown out reason. Whoever or whatever had been here before me had left traces, lingering in the walls, in the floors, in the air itself. A door ahead leaned crooked, its frame warped and cracked. Something drew me to it, though every instinct screamed to stop. I pushed gently. The hinges creaked like a low groan, and inside was a small patient room, walls scrawled with hurried, desperate handwriting. Some words were barely legible. Help, don't leave, they watch at night. I traced the lines with trembling fingers, the ink faded but alive, as if the writer had just stepped away. I noticed the floorboards were uneven, bowed in places where time and weight had worked against them. Papers littered the corners, patient files yellowed and brittle. One lay open, a ledger of treatments, electroshock schedules, sedative doses, notes about behavior. Some entries were clinical cold, others were frantic, almost personal. Patient vanished after night treatment. Door locked from inside. No record next day. The words hit me harder than I expected. Vanished. Locked from inside. And the official record said nothing. My stomach churned. I closed the file slowly, careful not to disturb more dust, but a soft scrape beneath the door made me freeze. A chair shifted, or maybe it was nothing, but my body told me it was. I moved deeper, past rooms with broken beds, splintered chairs, and torn curtains that swayed without wind. The whispering followed, not constant but teasing, just enough to keep my ears straining. Don't look, stay away, leave now. They seemed to speak in chorus, overlapping, fragmenting. Some sounded childlike, others raspy, aged, desperate. The building itself seemed to breathe. A note pinned to a corkboard caught my eye. Handwriting jagged, hurried. They watched the halls after lights out. Never opened the last door. I felt a cold trickle down my spine. What was the last door? Was it the one at the end of the hall, partially hidden behind a fallen wardrobe? My curiosity burned despite my fear. I approached cautiously, dragging my fingertips along the peeling paint, each scrape a tiny alarm. The air grew colder, heavier. Dust motes hung like frozen sparks, illuminated by weak light. Then I saw it, scratches, deep and chaotic, carved into the floor. They led toward the door, zigzagging like frantic footsteps caught in panic. I hesitated. Something about the scratches felt urgent, almost warning. But the whispers grew louder here, blending into a chorus of warning and pleading. My heartbeat spiked. I took the final step before the door and pushed it slowly. Inside was a small office, papers stacked haphazardly. Patient files lay open across the desk and floor. Most were mundane: dates, medications, treatments. But one caught my eye. The name was smudged, illegible, but beside it, a note written in a different hand. "He is here. I can't leave. They won't let me." I swallowed. The room felt tighter, air thicker. I leaned closer to read more, but the whispering shifted. Not coming from the walls now, but behind me. I spun around. Empty hallway. But the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, pulling toward the walls, curling like they wanted to reach me. I turned back to the desk. Another file fell open as if nudged by an unseen hand. Night treatments, patient resists, locked in isolation, screams unheard, record erased. The words blurred and sharpened alternately as if mocking my attempt to understand. I realized then this place hadn't just forgotten its victims, it had erased them. Their existence reduced to whispers, scratches, ink fatting on brittle paper. The whispers intensified, overlapping, almost a chant. "He sees, he knows, don't follow." I stumbled backward, bumping into a wall. My hands traced the peeling paint, grounding me. I wanted to leave, but the hallway stretched endlessly, familiar yet foreign. Every door I passed seemed to twitch slightly, as if reacting to my presence. I found a room that had once been a therapy chamber. Chairs in a circle, now splintered, the carpet stained and worn. On the wall, scrawled in hurried lines, "They take them at night. Never alone. Watch the halls. Watch the halls." The repetition gnawed at me, building a rhythm I couldn't ignore. I shivered. I understood then. The building remembered, and it remembered me. A faint sound, soft at first, like a footstep on broken tile, drew my attention. I froze. The whispering became clearer. "Behind you, watch closely, last file." I turned slowly, heart hammering. Nothing. Yet I felt a presence, something patient, something aware. My chest tightened. I wasn't imagining the feeling of being watched, of being counted among the missing. I bent to inspect another ledger on the floor. Names, dates, treatments, some crossed out, some annotated. One entry was different, the writing frantic, jagged, almost desperate. "I hear them in the walls. They whisper my name. I cannot leave. Do not let them see you." I felt a chill creep along my spine, my hands shaking as I pressed the page closer. The shadows seemed to pulse. A whisper, faint and urgent, followed me as I moved, guiding me toward a final room at the end of the hall. Its door hung crooked, barely attached to its frame. I hesitated, knowing instinctively that whatever was inside had never seen sunlight. My hand brushed the handle, cold, unnerving, as if something alive recoiled at my touch. I pushed. The door groaned and swung inward, revealing a small storage area. Dust swirled in weak sunlight from a broken window. Papers littered the floor. But in the center, a single file stood upright, untouched by dust. I knelt, heart racing, and opened it. Patient name missing. Details blank. But a note scrawled in furious handwriting. "They will come for anyone who knows. Leave before it's too late." The whispering rose to a crescendo, a chorus of voices, pleading and warning, surrounding me. My skin prickled. I understood then. The building didn't just keep memories. It marked them, guarded them, fed on the curiosity of anyone who entered. I wanted to flee, yet a part of me had to see it, had to know what had happened to all those names, all those lives erased from the records. I stepped back, the file still in my hands, the shadows coiling around my feet. The hallway stretched endlessly, the whispering growing fainter as I moved toward the exit, but never disappearing entirely. Each step felt heavier, weighted by unseen eyes. I glanced once at the room I had just left. The door quivered slightly, as if watching me leave, as if disappointed. I didn't look back again. The hospital swallowed the echoes behind me. The gates groaned faintly as I passed, rusted metal rasping against itself. Dust motes caught the last light of the day, shimmering like the memories I had uncovered, fragile, fleeting, alive only because I had disturbed them. Even now, walking away, I can hear it, the faint whispers riding the wind, the rhythm of voices in the walls, urging, warning, remembering. And I know as certain as the cold air on my skin that the hospital will never let anyone truly leave. Its halls have teeth, its shadows have eyes, and my name, though not yet written in its files, has already been noted. Somewhere deep inside, I sense the voices will call again. The records I touched are not finished with me. They will follow. They always follow. I found it at the end of the eastern corridor, a heavy, rusted door with a padlock that had long since been twisted shut. The air around it felt different, colder, almost viscous, like it weighed down my lungs before I even touched it. A draft hissed from beneath, carrying a faint scent of damp concrete and something more metallic, sharp, like blood left to dry. I pressed my hand against the cold metal. The padlock shivered slightly, as if recognizing me or warning me away. From somewhere deep behind the wall came a muffled sound. At first I thought it was the wind, sighing through broken windows, but then I heard it again. A soft, ragged cry, deliberate, terrified. My stomach clenched. It wasn't human, not entirely. Or maybe it was once. I could feel the tension in it, the panic, the trapped urgency. The sound seemed to push against the walls themselves, vibrating through the concrete under my feet. I crouched to listen, my eyes tracing the lines of peeling paint and rusted hinges. The corridor stretched behind me, dim and oppressive, shadows pooling at the corners like spilled ink. The cries stopped suddenly, leaving only a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat as if it were thunder. My pulse raced. Part of me wanted to run, but another part, some darker, curious part, pulled me closer to the door. I pressed my ear against the metal. The cries returned, weaker this time, almost like whispers between sobs. The walls themselves seemed to breathe around me. Dust swirled in the faint beams of light through the cracked windows, and for a moment I could have sworn shapes moved inside the dust itself, tiny, human, writhing just beyond focus. My fingers brushed the padlock again. I considered forcing it, but a voice in my head, some instinct, some memory of the warnings from the last ward made me hesitate. What was trapped here? And more importantly, who or what had locked it away? The cries changed. Patterns emerged in the sound, subtle but unnerving. Sometimes they mimicked breathing, sometimes speech, almost forming words, fractured and incomprehensible. Please don't leave, or maybe stay, I wasn't sure. My mind raced, trying to parse the syllables, and I realized the more I listened, the more personal it felt, as if the sound was aware of me, as if it was reaching. I circled the door slowly, inspecting the wall for any seam or crack. A narrow vent near the floor gave a glimpse inside, just enough to see shadows twisting unnaturally. I pressed my eye against it, heart hammering. Inside, the room was nearly empty, but the air shimmered strangely, like heat above asphalt in summer, or something else I couldn't name. And then I saw it. A form curled in the corner, hunched, skin pale, eyes bright with silent terror. It didn't move toward me, didn't call, yet I felt its gaze pierce me, threading into my chest like a needle. I stumbled back, startled by the intensity. The draft grew colder, sweeping past me in invisible fingers. It carried a low murmur now, a chorus of sounds layered together, crying, scratching, muttered names. Some voices were familiar, echoes of the hospital's forgotten patients. Others were new, sharp and fearful, almost pleading. I noticed scratches on the door, deep gouges in the metal around the handle, as though someone, or something, had tried to claw its way out. Each mark was jagged, chaotic, yet deliberate, forming patterns that my mind struggled to understand. A line seemed to trace a message. Do not, or you will join. The implication was obvious and horrifying. My hand hovered over the padlock. The idea of unlocking it terrified me, but the form inside tugged at something deep within me. Curiosity, empathy, fear, maybe all three at once. The air thickened, pressing against my chest. The muffled cries intensified, and I realized something even stranger. They weren't just cries. They were reacting to me, to my hesitation, my presence, my breath. I stepped back, trying to gather my thoughts. Another whisper threaded through the hallway, faint but distinct. He sees you. Do not open. It sounded almost like a warning, yet my fingers itched to pry the lock open. The old hospital seemed alive in that moment, watching, waiting for my choice. The form shifted slightly inside the vent. A hand emerged briefly, pale, trembling, then retracted. My pulse leapt. The room beyond seemed to pulse with the sound of slow, uneven breathing. I realized then that whatever was in there hadn't seen sunlight in years, maybe decades. The air smelled of old sweat decay and something more indefinable, fear distilled into scent. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the wall next to the door. Scrawled words scratched into the paint came into view. They do not forgive curiosity. They take it with them. My mind churned. Was it referring to the hospital itself? The things inside the locked ward, or those who had tried before me, vanished without record? A sudden knock, soft but distinct, reverberated from the door. My heart lurched. The cries inside fell silent. I pressed my ear to the metal, straining to hear, and then realized the knocking had a rhythm, deliberate, almost like a message. My throat went dry. I could feel my pulse in my temples. Something beyond the door wanted communication or warning, or maybe it wanted me. The vent shivered and faint scratching began again, running along the walls inside the ward. My imagination screamed, but my body rooted me to the spot. I could see now that the scratches formed shapes, letters, symbols. I couldn't read them entirely, but I understood the intent. Someone or something had tried to escape and failed. The walls had absorbed the struggle. The air itself seemed to hum with it. I backed up slowly, aware of every sound. The hallway stretched endlessly, shadows pooling and flickering. The whispers returned, fragments of memory, names, dates, last cries, all merging into a tapestry of despair. One voice rose above the others, clear, insistent. Do not release us. Yet I couldn't turn away. I needed to know, to see, to understand. The form in the corner moved again, a pale hand touching the floor, dragging along the dusty tiles. It didn't reach me, but its intention was clear. It was trapped, waiting, pleading. And somehow I knew that if I ignored it, the ward would remain a prison forever. I knelt near the padlock, fingers brushing the cold metal. A shiver ran through me, the whispers coalescing into a single, urgent thought. One touch and it begins. I hesitated. My mind raced. What would happen if I freed whatever was inside? The air shifted as if the building itself held its breath. The draft carried a faint scent of iron and mildew, tinged with something older, something darker. Then faintly, I heard another sound coming from deep within the ward. Not cries, not whispers, but a single, low voice, human or what was once human. Thank you, it said, impossibly, and the chill in my bones deepened. The air thickened further, the shadows stretching toward me. I knew then that the act of unlocking wouldn't just open a door. It would release history, pain, maybe something beyond comprehension. I drew back my hand, heart hammering. The vent shivered violently, and the form inside pressed closer to the metal, straining. I felt its desperation, its awareness of me. I could almost see the life it had once had, the long years of isolation, the cruel experiments, the cold that had settled into its bones. And I realized something terrifying. Whatever was trapped here wasn't just a remnant of the hospital. It was the hospital itself, alive in memory and anguish, bound by walls and locks. I stepped back, breathing hard. The whispers faded slightly, replaced by the sound of slow, deliberate movement within the ward. I knew I couldn't leave without taking something with me, knowledge perhaps, or a part of the haunting itself. The building had claimed that much at least. The locked door had become a threshold, a test of courage and consequence. I looked once more at the padlock, rusted and final. The form inside pressed closer to the vent, its gaze, if I could call it that, piercing. The cries began again, muffled but intense, and I understood in a cold, sinking certainty that some doors, once approached, never allow a visitor to leave unchanged. The hallway remained still behind me. Dust drifted in streaks of dying light, but the ward pulsed faintly, alive, aware. I could feel it marking me, recording my hesitation, weighing my intent. I moved away slowly, keeping my eyes forward, though the whispers clung to my mind, insistent, shaping my thoughts, warning me that the locked ward's history wasn't finished, and I had stepped into its story. Somewhere deep inside, the cries would continue, muffled and eternal, and I knew as I exited the corridor into the empty hospital that the locked ward would follow me in memory. Its presence, its desperation, its hunger for recognition would never leave. The air still carried its chill, and the shadows seemed to stretch toward me, not threatening, not yet, but waiting, always waiting. I stepped out of the hospital just as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, pale and hesitant. The air was cold, sharper than the walls inside, and carried a faint tang of rust and mildew, lingering from the corridors I had left behind. Every step on the gravel crunched loudly, jarring in the unnatural quiet. I felt it immediately, a weight pressing on my back, not physical, but something unseen, tracking me. The gates groaned behind me, swinging slightly in the wind. Shadows clung to them, stretching thin and long across the ground. At first, I thought it was just the early sun playing tricks, but then I noticed movement, dark shapes in the broken windows of the upper floors. They didn't shift like animals or reflections. They waited. I froze, my fingers tightening on my backpack strap. There were faces there, just for a moment, obscured and indistinct, but watching. And then they were gone. A chill ran down my spine, and I tried to shake it off. Probably just the residue of the ward, I told myself. The locked rooms, the whispers, the weight of what I'd seen inside. But as I walked along the cracked pavement, I kept glancing back. Every window, every jagged pane of glass seemed to hide a shape, a shadow, a pair of eyes that didn't blink but followed. I remembered the ward, the hands pressed to the vents, the whispers, the faint voice that had said, "Thank you," or was it a warning? It replayed in my head like a loop, tightening my chest. I felt the building's gaze on me still, even from outside, as if its walls had eyes and memory. I tried to focus on the horizon, the rising sun washing the sky with orange streaks, but the shadows in the windows didn't shift with the light. They remained still, patient and watching. I passed the main entrance and took the path leading to the town road. Hopping movement and distance would erase the feeling. But the unease only grew. Every reflection, puddles in the gravel, shards of broken glass, caught hints of figures behind me, always behind. Never approaching, never moving, just observing. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but the instinct in my gut screamed otherwise. The street lamps flickered weakly, remnants of old wiring failing in the dawn. I noticed one shadow detach from the building completely, thin and elongated, sliding across the broken lawn as if it were stretching its limbs. It didn't rush me, but the deliberate, smooth motion made my stomach tight. I quickened my pace, only to hear a faint echo behind me like footsteps, though none existed. My breath caught. My pulse raced. I wasn't alone. I reached the first bend in the road and dared a glance back. The sanitarium loomed behind me, grim and silent, its windows fractured like fractured teeth in a snarling mouth. In one of the upper windows, I could swear I saw someone, or something, lean forward slightly, watching me, tilting its head. Not human, not fully, but with a strange, deliberate intent. Then the shadow recoiled, melting into the darkness inside. A gust of wind carried whispers along the path, faint and unintelligible. I couldn't tell if they were words, memories, or hallucinations. "Stay, don't, follow." I shook my head, trying to ground myself, but the whispers followed, threading into my thoughts. I imagined them weaving through the trees lining the road, the rustling leaves forming shapes that resembled hands reaching toward me. I stumbled, catching myself on the fence. The boards were splintered, half-rotted, yet the shadows pressed against them, forming angles that weren't natural. I heard a dragging sound behind me, not fast, not heavy, but deliberate. My stomach churned. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Then the shadows in the windows shifted again, multiple now, crouching, stretching, disappearing. My chest tightened. Fear wasn't the right word. It was recognition, something I had awakened inside. That place was following me still. I took a breath and kept moving, my eyes scanning every broken pane and every gap between boards. I noticed shapes in the corners of the old hospital lawn, thin, black, stretching toward the road, melting into themselves when I tried to look directly. They didn't run. They didn't attack. They just observed, patient and deliberate, like sentries. I tried to tell myself they were tricks of light, the morning mist forming illusions, but I couldn't shake the feeling of awareness in their gaze. At a small rise in the road, I paused, chest heaving. The town was distant now, just rooftops and the faint smoke of chimneys. The shadows didn't appear behind me at first. I thought maybe, finally, I had outrun the lingering presence. Then I felt it, a prickling along the back of my neck, a pressure behind my eyes, a weight settling on my shoulders. I dared to look back. In the largest broken window on the second floor, the shadow had formed fully. A figure, dark and elongated, seemed to lean outward. Its face was indistinct, but I felt the focus of its gaze as if it could see my very thoughts. And then it lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, and pointed directly at me. A shiver ran through my body. The fingers were too long, too thin, impossibly precise. I wanted to run, but my legs felt leaden, my mind tethered to that silent accusation. The road curved sharply, and I thought I could lose it there, put distance between me and the old building. But the shadows followed the windows, reshaping as I moved, bending angles and panes to remain oriented toward me. I realized then that they weren't constrained by walls, windows, or gravity. They existed in the lingering memory of the hospital, stretching outward, reaching for recognition, feeding on awareness. A sudden sound broke the oppressive quiet, a snapping of twigs behind me. My head whipped around. Nothing. But in the periphery, a movement too subtle to define, a black ripple along the tree line. My pulse hit my throat. I kept walking, faster now, heart hammering, breath ragged, aware that every shadow behind me, every jagged pane of glass might conceal something sentient. I stumbled onto the town road proper, where sunlight finally began to pierce the morning haze. Buildings stood in normal angles, people moved about their chores, unaware of the nightmare I had left just beyond. But even here, fragments of shadows trailed me, dark streaks along walls, shapes that vanished when confronted. My mind reeled. Had I carried them with me? Or were they attached, marking me as someone aware, someone who had looked too long, seen too deeply? A sudden pause in my stride brought the strangest sight. One shadow, smaller this time, more solid, hovered across the edge of a puddle near the road. It didn't move like a reflection, didn't mimic anything natural. Its shape shifted slightly as if breathing. And then when I blinked, it was gone, yet the feeling of being watched intensified. I swallowed hard, chest tight, knowing the weight wasn't fatting. It would follow, patient and deliberate, until either I understood or it claimed attention in full. I kept moving, finally reaching the first occupied street, where sunlight touched walls and cobblestones in a reassuring warmth. I thought briefly of the ward, the whispers, the locked doors. The building's presence had followed me, stretching through memory, shadow, and perception. Every window I passed on the way toward the town seemed to twitch slightly, the light reflecting in ways that suggested eyes, intent, observation. By the time I reached the town square, the shadows seemed to retreat, leaving faint impressions in peripheral vision. But a lingering coldness remained, a sensation of being watched by something patient, unyielding. I realized that the old hospital had not just observed me, it had marked me. Whatever lived in memory, in dust, in broken glass, would follow, patient and deliberate. I paused at a fountain, the sunlight reflecting on rippling water. For a moment I felt relief, the first since entering the hospital. And then faintly, I saw a shadow reflected in the water that shouldn't have been there. Elongated, dark, and still pointing at me. My stomach dropped. The hospital didn't end at its walls. Its presence stretched outward, carried by awareness, by memory, by me. I turned away quickly, forcing myself to focus on normality. The town, the people, the mundane life continuing as if the hospital had never existed. But in the back of my mind, I felt a truth I couldn't shake. Some shadows don't recede with distance. Some presences aren't constrained by walls. They linger, patient, deliberate, silent, and always watching. As I walked past the last street lamp before leaving the town proper, I glanced over my shoulder one final time. In a broken window far above the hospital, a dark figure lingered, arms folded, head tilted. Not moving, not needing to. Its awareness was enough. And for a long, sinking moment, I understood. Leaving the hospital didn't mean leaving it behind. Its shadows had already followed, and I would carry them, patient and deliberate, into every dawn that came after. The moment I stepped onto the overgrown path, the world seemed to narrow around me. Grass taller than my knees brushed against my shins, wet with dew and decay, carrying a scent of damp earth and something older, something rotting beneath the soil. I should have hesitated, turned back, but a pull I couldn't name dragged me forward, past the first row of moss-covered stones, leaning and cracked like forgotten teeth. The path curved between graves, many toppled, others fractured. Some inscriptions were completely worn away, names erased by time. Others were sharp, recent, and unsettling. I noticed fresh footprints pressed into the mud between the crumbling stones, leading deeper, but no sound accompanied them. Whoever or whatever had passed this way had left nothing else behind. No trash, no marks on the grass, just prints pressed deep enough that they seemed to belong to someone alive, though no one was visible. A bird screeched somewhere beyond the trees, flapping low, disturbed by my intrusion. I swallowed hard, trying to shake the prickle at the back of my neck, telling myself it was just the wind, the decay, the shape of things around me playing tricks. But the footprints were too deliberate, too measured. They led straight through graves I couldn't imagine anyone walking through, and then vanished into the dense undergrowth ahead. I reached a toppled stone and crouched to examine it. The moss clung stubbornly, but the stone's edge revealed a name, carved deep and precise. Eleanor C. 1921-1943. Her age struck me. Too young, far too young to rest in peace. And yet this grave had been neglected for decades. I felt a sudden need to step away, but a movement in the corner of my eye froze me. A shadow, or the trick of light between branches, shifted behind a row of taller stones. I stood slowly, heart hammering. The cemetery was silent except for my own breathing and the distant rustle of trees. The shadow didn't reappear when I looked directly, but the feeling lingered, like eyes had traced my every movement. I took a cautious step forward, crunching leaves and twigs beneath my boots, and noticed another anomaly. Flowers, fresh, tucked into a broken vase near a grave that had long since lost any care. I knelt hesitant. The petals were not wilted. They smelled faintly of something sweet, almost metallic, like blood beneath roses. I glanced around. The wind carried nothing from the road behind me, only the scent and the quiet. Someone had been here recently. But who? And why leave these flowers in a cemetery no one visited for decades? The path narrowed and I had to duck under low-hanging branches. Sunlight struggled through the thick canopy, casting the ground in mottled shadows. I noticed a series of small rocks, stacked in haphazard towers, almost like markers. Each seemed deliberate, as if they were pointing somewhere, guiding or warning. My chest tightened with unease, yet the pull forward persisted. Something wanted me here. I wasn't sure what or why. Then I heard it, a faint shuffle behind me. Not a footstep, not the crunch of leaves, but a subtle movement like fabric brushing against stone. I froze, holding my breath, every muscle tensing. Nothing appeared when I spun, only the crooked rows of graves stretching into darkness. And yet, the sensation remained. I was not alone. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs refused. My curiosity, reckless and foolish, kept me rooted. I followed the rock markers deeper into the cemetery. The air grew cooler, heavier. Shadows seemed to cling to the stones, lengthening unnaturally. I passed a grave with a cracked headstone. Samuel R. 1897-1960. A child. The dirt above it had been disturbed recently. My stomach turned. Fresh footprints converged near it and then disappeared into a thicket where the path ended. I crouched again, tracing the faint impressions, pressed deeper than before, almost too defined to be accidental. A whisper slid through the air, just barely audible, like wind threading through a cracked window. "Why are you here?" My head snapped toward the sound, but only the trees moved. No one. I took a shaky step forward and the whisper came again, clearer this time, not carried by wind but in my mind, echoing from somewhere between memory and the present. I froze, eyes darting. The air felt thick, almost solid, pressing in on me from every side. A low fog began to seep along the ground, curling around my boots. I looked down and noticed footprints forming behind me, not my own, something else, stepping silently in my tracks. My pulse raced, throat dry. I spun around, heart hammering, and saw nothing but mist and broken stones. The prints ended abruptly at a shattered monument, as if the person or thing had vanished mid-step. I forced myself to keep moving, following the path as it wound deeper. Each grave seemed older, yet every so often a new marker appeared, one that didn't belong. Polished stone, fresh lettering, dates that made no sense. Some were names I didn't recognize, others faint echoes of names I had read in old newspapers, vanished from records decades ago. I felt a strange familiarity, a pull I couldn't explain. Someone had walked these paths before me, leaving traces meant for discovery or warning. Branches snapped sharply ahead and I froze. The fog thickened, turning stones into vague, looming shapes. I noticed movement at the edge of my vision again. A figure, thin and indistinct, flitted between graves. Not running, not approaching, just gliding. I squinted. The air felt charged, electric, pressing against my skin like anticipation. I wanted to call out, but no words came. A sudden gust of wind brought a whisper of sound I couldn't ignore. A low, guttural sigh that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself. I stepped closer to a grave with a recent flower still upright, petals brushing against my hand. A chill ran through me as if the soil beneath was alive, watching. I looked around. The shadows in the fog seemed thicker here, moving with subtle intent. Footsteps echoed behind me, then stopped. Silence pressed in. My head whipped around. The mist parted slightly, revealing a toppled tombstone. Underneath, the dirt had been disturbed and something glinted faintly in the dim light. A key, or a piece of metal buried long ago, unearthed by the footsteps that had tracked me here. I crouched, trembling, and touched it. Cold, smooth, unyielding. As I rose, the fog thickened again. The cemetery felt larger now, the paths twisting in ways they hadn't before. I glimpsed a shape moving against the mist, a figure taller than a man, indistinct, with eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the early light. It didn't approach, yet every instinct told me it was aware of me, measuring, waiting. My legs shook. I forced myself to keep moving, to follow the twisted path to see where it would lead. The path ended at a stone wall broken in one section. Beyond it, the cemetery continued, wild and unkempt. Footprints led over the wall into the undergrowth. I noticed them vanish into darkness again. My chest tightened, but I felt drawn forward, compelled. There was something here, something buried, watching, waiting. I had glimpsed traces, whispers, shadows, but the truth, the full presence, remained hidden. I took a deep breath, stepping toward the gap in the wall. The fog curled around me, thickening like a living thing. The figure appeared again at the edge, standing silently, almost like a sentinel. I couldn't tell if it was alive, human, or something else entirely. My mind raced with questions. Who had left the footprints? Why were fresh flowers among graves long forgotten? And most unsettling, what was waiting just beyond my sight in the overgrown paths ahead? A crow cawed somewhere in the distance, cutting through the tension, and I forced a shaky laugh. The sound seemed to carry, swallowed immediately by the fog. The figure didn't move. The path ahead twisted into shadow and mist, inviting, threatening, alive. I stepped forward. Every instinct told me to run, to turn back, but the pull of the cemetery was stronger than fear. The overgrown paths whispered secrets, promised truths I wasn't ready for, yet I had to know. I had to follow the footprints to uncover the presence that had been walking these graves, patient, deliberate, unseen. And with each step I realized, the cemetery was no longer just a place of the dead. It had claimed me. The fog lingered low as I moved deeper into the cemetery, brushing against brambles and broken stones. My boots sank into wet earth with every step. The sunlight struggled through the mist, painting the graves in shifting, pale gold. That's when I noticed it. One of the old 19th century markers had a new stone pressed tightly against it, clean and polished, as if someone had placed it there yesterday. I knelt to read it. The engraving was sharp, the letters fresh. Marion K. 1987-2025. My pulse hitched. How had a modern grave ended up here, among graves over 100 years old, in a cemetery forgotten by almost everyone? The names around it were long erased by moss and rain, yet this one was vivid, almost shining. I ran my fingers over the cold stone. The soil around it had been disturbed recently, still soft enough that I could leave my own fingerprints. I stepped back, scanning the rows. Another polished marker appeared a few feet away, leaning slightly against an 1842 stone. Jacob L. 1992-2024. Each new grave seemed to mimic the old one's style, deliberately, eerily. Someone had taken care to make them blend in, yet they couldn't hide the truth. These burials were recent. And yet nobody knew. Nobody had seen them. How could that be possible? I followed the pattern, tracing the modern stones as they wove through the overgrown grass like a secret thread. The footprints I had seen yesterday seemed to echo here, ghostly impressions pressed into the soil, leading from one grave to the next. Whoever had placed these graves had done it alone, silently, deliberately. My stomach tightened. The sense of being watched returned, heavier this time, as if the shadows themselves were aware I was uncovering their secret. Then I noticed the names. At first I thought they were ordinary common names, Marion, Jacob, Lillian, Thomas. But as I read further down the row, unease settled in my chest like ice. These names belonged to people who were still alive, or at least should be. I'd seen some of them in newspapers, in social media posts, living lives that hadn't ended yet. And now their names were etched in stone. I staggered backward, nearly tripping over a toppled headstone. My mind raced. Someone had been burying people alive. Or was this some sort of twisted memorial made while the subjects still walked the earth? The fog thickened, curling around my boots, carrying whispers that I couldn't place. You shouldn't be here. The voice was low, distant, but unmistakably human. My breath caught. I pressed forward, forcing myself to examine the next grave. Lillian R. 1992-2023. Another living name, yet the soil was freshly disturbed, as if hiding secrets beneath. I knelt to inspect it, and the smell hit me, earth, damp, but underneath, something metallic, faint, and lingering. My fingers grazed a thin metallic shape protruding slightly from the mound. A small, tarnished locket. I picked it up, and as I opened it, the fog shifted, swirling around me like the air itself was alive. Inside was a tiny photograph, blurred but unmistakable. The person buried here, staring directly at me. A cold breeze passed through, and I shivered. Something about these graves was wrong on a level I couldn't articulate. The pattern of placement, the meticulousness, the way they mimicked history. It was a message, a warning, or perhaps a ritual. I stood, glancing over my shoulder. The cemetery seemed alive with movement now, shadows shifting unnaturally between trees and stones. I could feel eyes tracing my steps, though nothing appeared in sight. As I followed the line of graves, I noticed small scrawled markings on the old stones. Faint scratches that almost looked like runes, carved haphazardly, yet deliberate. They were subtle, easy to miss, yet each seemed to point toward the modern graves. Someone or something was guiding me or testing me. I bent to examine a mark closer. My fingers traced the rough etchings, and a shiver ran through me. The scratches formed names I recognized, but not fully, half-formed, distorted, as if reality itself had tried to resist writing them down. A sudden sound, footsteps crunching leaves, snapped me upright. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned sharply, but the cemetery was empty. The fog pressed in, swallowing shapes and sounds alike. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was the wind or my imagination, but I knew it was. The air was charged, heavy with intent, and I had the distinct feeling I had crossed a line, stepped into a hidden world layered over the old one. I crouched beside another polished stone, Thomas E. 1985-2022. The name rang a bell. A local story, a missing person case from 2 years ago. The dates matched precisely. I touched the soil, feeling the subtle depressions beneath, perfectly formed graves beneath my fingertips. How could someone dig these graves in secret without anyone noticing? And why here, among the dead who had lain forgotten for a century? I staggered backward, stepping onto a root and nearly losing my balance. The fog thickened suddenly, wrapping around me in damp fingers. Then I saw it, a figure blurred in the mist standing between two old stones. Not moving, not approaching, just watching. My chest tightened, a cold, primal fear curling in my stomach. I squinted, trying to make sense of it. The figure had no clear features, yet I could feel its awareness, its focus entirely on me. A whisper drifted through the fog, closer this time, almost brushing my ear. They shouldn't be here, but they are. I spun around. Nothing. Just stones and shadows, the air humming with tension. I glanced at the modern graves again. Each one seemed to pulse subtly in the mist, a heartbeat I couldn't hear but felt deep in my chest. Whoever had been buried here, or whatever was tied to these names, wasn't finished. I forced myself forward, following the line of graves toward a section of the cemetery I hadn't noticed before. The trees grew denser, their branches clawing at each other, casting intricate shadows over the ground. The modern graves were more numerous here, some pressed against old family plots, some tucked into corners where sunlight barely reached. Their placement was deliberate, almost ritualistic. The spacing, the alignment, they formed a pattern I couldn't yet decipher. Then I noticed the footprints again, fresh, distinct, threading between the stones, leading away from the graves. But unlike before, they didn't vanish. They continued into the undergrowth, turning sharply at odd angles, crossing lines of graves that seemed impossible to traverse. I followed them cautiously. Every step made the fog swirl more aggressively, carrying whispers I couldn't understand. My heartbeat drummed in my ears. The cemetery was alive, but alive in a way that wasn't human. I came to a small clearing where the fog thinned, revealing a grouping of the oldest stones, leaning together as if in conversation. In the center, the modern graves were clustered tightly, almost hiding behind the old monuments. I noticed the dates. They spanned decades, yet none had any record beyond this cemetery. Deaths that officially never happened, names that were erased from the world above, now buried in secret. A sudden movement caught my eye, a shadow slipping behind a tree, low and deliberate. I couldn't tell if it was human, animal, or something else entirely. My instincts screamed at me to run, yet my feet remained planted. I couldn't leave. I had to know who or what was orchestrating this hidden cemetery, layering the living atop the dead. I approached the nearest modern stone. Marion K. I pressed my hand against it again. The soil beneath felt strangely warm, unnaturally so. A chill crawled up my arm, and the whisper came again, softer, almost intimate. You see them now, but you can't leave them. My pulse skyrocketed. I staggered back, heart hammering, yet I couldn't tear my eyes away. The fog shifted, coiling like a living thing, and for a brief moment I saw multiple figures standing among the graves, tall, thin, featureless, watching me. They didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt their attention like weight pressing against my chest. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root, and landed hard on damp earth. My breath came in ragged gasps. I scrambled to my feet and glanced once more at the modern graves. Each seemed to shimmer faintly in the mist, names glowing just enough to be legible. Their presence was impossible, yet undeniable. Someone had been burying these people in secret, ensuring the world above forgot them, while the shadows below remembered. A sudden gust tore through the trees, scattering leaves and fog in every direction. The figures vanished, leaving only the whispering wind. I pressed my palms to my face, shaking, trying to steady myself. My eyes darted over the graves again, tracing the polished stones, the toppled markers, the forgotten footprints. Every question I had raised only multiplied. Who had orchestrated this? Why were the living being buried in secret? And what did the shadows want with me? I finally backed toward the edge of the clearing, heart racing, fog curling at my ankles, still carrying the faint, metallic scent from the soil. The modern graves lay behind me, a secret within secrets, their names pulsing faintly as if aware of my gaze. I realized that whatever hand had placed them, whatever force lingered here, it was patient, watching, waiting for the next step. I turned away, moving slowly back toward the path that had led me here. The fog whispered around me, tugging at my senses, making the air feel alive. The cemetery seemed to exhale, a low, drawn-out sigh. I glanced over my shoulder once more. The polished stones glinted faintly, perfectly aligned, impossibly precise. And then I noticed something that froze me, fresh footprints appearing behind me, though I hadn't made a sound. I stopped, my breath clouded in the cold air. The line of graves stretched behind me, names glowing faintly, each one a reminder that the dead and the buried were not finished. The secret of the modern graves would follow me, And somewhere in the shadows, watching, waiting, the hand that had placed them was still active, patient, unseen. I stepped forward, heart pounding, knowing that I could never look at a cemetery the same way again. The overgrown paths had whispered their secrets, and the living, in their graves that shouldn't exist, had left their mark. The night pressed down around me, heavy and still, like the air itself had weight. Moonlight pooled between the tombstones, silver and sharp, cutting through the black folds of fog that clung to the ground. I'd returned to the cemetery after sunset, drawn back by the lingering questions from the modern graves. Something about the polished stones haunted me, as though they had unfinished business and had called me back. I walked slowly, boots sinking into damp earth, and the scent of wet leaves and soil wrapped around me. Shadows stretched unnaturally across broken markers, and for the first time I noticed the way the wind whispered through the branches, soft, almost conversational, carrying syllables I couldn't quite catch. Then I saw it, a faint glow behind a cluster of old stones, moving deliberately, slowly, like a lantern floating without a hand to carry it. I froze, my heart hammered in my chest. Whoever or whatever was there, they were careful, purposeful. The figure moved among the graves silently, barely disturbing the fog. I crouched behind a toppled headstone, eyes wide, trying to make sense of the shape. It wasn't human, and yet it was. Limbs elongated unnaturally in the moonlight. The way its head tilted to one side made me uneasy in a way that clawed at memory and instinct alike. Whispers started to thread through the trees, faint at first, almost beneath hearing. I leaned in, straining, and realized they weren't random sounds. They were words, fragments of old family disputes, arguments carried over decades, trapped in the air like smoke. You took what wasn't yours. It was always mine. You'll pay. Each snippet brushed past me, cold and accusing, as if the dead themselves were replaying grievances no living witness remained to recall. I inched forward, compelled despite fear. The figure paused near a freshly disturbed grave, the same neat, polished stones I had seen before, and lowered its head. The glow intensified for a moment, revealing an object in its hands. A small lantern, a candle, I couldn't tell. Its presence seemed to bend the moonlight, warping the shadows of nearby stones. I stepped closer, careful not to make a sound, and caught a glimpse of a face, half hidden under a hood. Pale, smooth, almost featureless, yet somehow familiar. A gust of wind carried one of the whispers clearly. "You should not have come back." The words licked my skin like frost. My stomach dropped. I wanted to run, but my feet refused. The glow drew me, pulling me into the heart of the graves, where the newest stones clustered tightly together. There was something in their arrangement tonight I hadn't noticed in the day. The way the moonlight pooled over the gaps between them, illuminating an almost ritualistic pattern. The figure moved again, shifting toward the shadows of the trees. I followed, careful to stay downwind, heart thundering. Each step revealed another whisper, another echo of arguments that had long ago been silenced by death. The will was mine. He betrayed us. No one will remember. I felt the air thicken, heavy with accusations, and realized that these voices weren't just memories. They were bound to this place, feeding off the living and the buried alike. I stumbled slightly over a root, and the figure turned abruptly, tilting its head as if listening to a sound only it could hear. My pulse skipped. It didn't speak, didn't move toward me, but the awareness of being observed pressed down like iron. My shadow stretched across the gravestones, and for a brief moment I thought it moved independently, twisting, merging with the mist. The glow flickered, and I noticed more figures emerging from the darkness, thin and indistinct, hovering near older graves. They didn't walk, they drifted, lingering in the silvered light, their focus entirely on me. My chest tightened. I wasn't merely trespassing, I was a witness, caught in a vigil centuries in the making. One figure stepped closer, the lantern now visible in its hands. Its light revealed a name etched into a fresh stone. Lillian R. 1992-2023. The letters gleamed unnaturally under the moon, as if freshly cut in defiance of the night. I felt a chill crawl along my spine. The same Lillian from the modern graves, the living name, now illuminated in this nocturnal congregation. The figure bent over the grave, whispering words I couldn't catch, but the urgency was clear, the devotion palpable. I realized then that these figures weren't ghosts of the long dead, they were guardians of something. A ritual, a memory, or something darker. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the whispering trees, the uneven moonlight, the living names buried among centuries of forgotten souls. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet I couldn't turn away. The whispers grew louder, overlapping now, a chorus of grievances and secrets. I caught fragments of another story, family betrayals, rivalries buried alongside those now resting in stone. It was as if the cemetery itself held grudges, preserved them in earth and shadow, and now demanded witness. He never should have left. You took what was mine. Justice. My breath came in shallow gasps. I felt the soil beneath me pulse subtly, a heartbeat I couldn't see but felt. A sudden rustle behind me made me spin, expecting another figure, but the fog had swallowed it again. I crouched beside a toppled stone, hands pressed into cold moss, and realized the figure was no longer alone. Shadows moved among the stones, silent, deliberate, maintaining a perfect distance. They didn't speak, yet I could feel their judgment, as if each name on the modern stones bound the living to the vigil in ways I didn't understand. I edged closer to the glowing figure again. The lantern cast a halo of light that made the surrounding mist swirl like living smoke. I could see small tokens placed at the base of several graves. A locket, a scrap of paper, a flower. Each seemed to echo a life interrupted, a story unfinished. The whispers seemed to emanate from these tokens as much as from the air itself. My mind raced. Someone had been tending to these graves at night, honoring secrets no one else could see. The figure shifted, and for a fleeting instant I saw its face fully, pale, unreadable, and yet intensely aware. Eyes like hollow wells staring into mine. I stumbled back, nearly falling over roots and stones, my heart hammering. It spoke not in words, but in a sensation, a thought pushed into my skull. Witness them or you become them. The warning wasn't threatening. It was certain, absolute. I glanced around. More figures emerged from the shadows, each hovering near a modern grave, their movements synchronized yet impossible. The air vibrated with tension. I could hear the whispers, feel the weight of the vigil pressing into my chest. The graves, both old and new, formed a network of secrets, binding life and death together in ways I couldn't comprehend. I forced myself to focus on the stones nearest me. The modern graves glimmered under the moon, the names etched freshly, almost defiantly. Each was a testament to the living, buried while alive, watched over by guardians I didn't understand. I noticed one small token I hadn't seen before, a key, tarnished and small, lying atop the soil. My hand hovered over it. Could it open a grave, or was it a key to understanding the vigil itself? I didn't dare touch it. The glowing figure turned slowly, as if sensing my hesitation. I could feel its gaze, unwavering, and the mist around it thickened, swallowing the space between us. The whispers became sharper, more insistent, threading through the trees. They should not be here. Remember, you cannot leave. Panic prickled at the edges of my mind. The weight of unseen eyes pressed me to the ground, yet curiosity, that fatal curiosity, kept me rooted. I took a cautious step forward. The figure didn't move. The other shadows remained motionless, guardians of the night. I noticed the alignment of the graves now, old and new, polished and moss-covered, forming lines and curves that mirrored each other like a language I had yet to learn. Every footprint, every token, every whisper was deliberate. The cemetery wasn't abandoned, it was awake, orchestrating a vigil I wasn't meant to witness. A sudden hush fell over the clearing. The whispers stopped. Even the fog seemed to pause, freezing the air in place. The figure lowered its lantern slightly, and for a heartbeat, the silence was deafening. I realized then that the vigil wasn't just for the dead. It was for the living, the buried, and anyone who stumbled too close. And I was too close. I stumbled back toward the path that led out of the clearing, heart racing, trying to breathe evenly. The figures didn't follow. They simply watched, unblinking, unwavering. The moonlight caught the edges of their forms, pale and impossible against the black of night. Every step away felt like leaving a weight behind, but the presence lingered, etched into the mist and earth. As I reached the tree line, the fog began to thin. The whispers returned, softer now, almost like sighs. Remember, witness, I glanced back once. The lantern's glow lingered among the graves, the figure standing motionless, a silent sentinel. The modern stones gleamed faintly, their names unreadable in the distance, yet somehow alive in the night. I understood then that this cemetery would follow me, that the vigil never truly ended, and that those buried or watched would continue their silent ritual, whether I was there or not. I turned fully, stepping into the shadowed path beyond the cemetery. The air was lighter now, the fog dissipating. Yet when I glanced over my shoulder one last time, the glow was still there, subtle, persistent, and the figures, though distant, were still watching. The vigil didn't belong to me, but it had claimed a part of me. And I knew, even as the moon sank behind clouds, that I would return. Because some secrets once seen cannot be unseen. The path out of the cemetery felt narrower than I remembered, the trees leaning in, their branches like crooked fingers pointing at my back. The moon had sunk lower now, a pale smear behind clouds, and the fog had thickened, curling around my ankles and stealing the sound of my steps. I thought I was alone, that the figures and the vigil were behind me, but a voice carried on the wind, a low, deliberate rasp that made my blood tighten. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, every nerve on fire. The words weren't whispered, they weren't shouted. They simply existed, threaded into the air like a warning I had no choice but to hear. I squinted through the mist and saw him, an old man standing near the edge of the graveyard, leaning on a crooked cane. His coat was tattered, his hat pulled low, shadowing a face lined with age and concern, and yet his eyes were sharp, piercing through the night as if he could see right into my thoughts. "You've seen things you shouldn't," he said, stepping closer, his boots silent on the sodden earth. "Some stones carry more than names. They carry debts, secrets, and some debts demand witness." I swallowed, unsure if I wanted to respond. I didn't mean. He cut me off with a slow shake of his head. "Intent doesn't matter here. Curiosity is dangerous. The living aren't meant to see what sleeps beneath the soil or what keeps watch over the new graves." His voice carried authority, but beneath it trembled something else, fear, maybe regret. I glanced back over my shoulder. The modern stones glimmered faintly through the fog, the faint outlines of the vigil's figures barely visible. My heartbeat spiked. "Figures," I said, my voice barely audible. I saw them. They are not your concern," the caretaker interrupted. "You don't know the rules of this place. Those who disturb them often pay the price." He moved closer, and I could smell the scent of wet wool and earth clinging to him. His eyes, though tired, held an unsettling clarity. "Some graves are not meant to be opened. Some names should not be remembered by the living, and some who leave do not return unchanged." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the wind swept through the trees and carried voices again. Soft, layered, almost indistinct at first. Then I caught words, faintly repeating as though the earth itself murmured. "Never leave. Remember. They watch." I looked at the caretaker. His gaze followed mine to the modern stones. "Do you hear them?" he asked quietly. "Even the wind listens here, even it carries the stories and sometimes the threats." He gestured toward a cluster of graves near the center of the yard. "Those stones are recent. You think they are ordinary, but they are not. They mark debts, unfinished business, and guardians. Some are bound to the living, and some are bound to you, whether you want it or not." I shivered. Why warn me? Why tell me any of this? He stepped closer still, cane scraping softly against the soil. "Because some mistakes can't be undone. Because even the curious must choose witness or flee. And once you've witnessed, there's no forgetting." He paused, and for a moment I thought he might vanish into the fog like the figures I'd seen before. But he stayed, his presence solid, pressing against the night like gravity. "Some graves," he continued, voice low, "should be left alone even if they call to you. Some names carry histories that can twist the living into shadows. You have seen too much already. Do not tempt it further." The wind rose, carrying a chorus of whispers that made me spin. "You shouldn't have come. They're watching. Leave or join them. The words wrapped around me, brushing against skin and memory. I wanted to run, wanted to escape into the forest beyond, but the caretaker's gaze pinned me. It wasn't threat, it was inevitability. Will I see them again? I asked, voice trembling. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he crouched slightly, lowering himself closer to the earth, hand brushing the soil near a moss-covered stone. Some of what you've seen will follow you, he said at last. Even if you leave, even if you try to forget. Those who disturb certain graves become part of the story. The earth remembers. The guardians remember. And sometimes, the wind carries reminders long after you think you've gone. I noticed his hand linger over a stone that looked like one of the older markers, centuries worn, nearly swallowed by moss. I couldn't see a name clearly, but the indentation beneath his fingers seemed deliberate. Who are they? I asked. They're the keepers, he replied, straightening. Not all of them are human. Some are bound here by vengeance, some by grief, some by promises that death never claimed. They watch over the debts and they do not forgive easily. You've glimpsed them. That is enough for now. Do not push your luck further. A soft rustle made me whirl around. In the distance, through the fog, I thought I saw movement near the modern graves. A faint shimmer of light flickered there, almost like lanterns, almost like the same figures from before. My stomach turned. Were they waiting, observing? I couldn't tell. The caretaker's voice cut through my fear again. Do not mistake curiosity for courage. You are not the first to wander here at night. You will not be the last, but you may not survive the lessons others learned too late. I tried to step back, to give space between myself and the stories pressing from the soil, but the fog seemed thicker now, curling over my ankles, climbing my legs. The whispers followed me, brushing against my thoughts, tugging at memory, demanding recognition. I shivered, feeling the pull of the cemetery, the weight of the dead and the vigilant alike. Are the modern graves, the ones I saw earlier, safe? I asked, voice barely audible. He shook his head slowly. Safe? That depends on what you mean. They are marked, yes, polished, tended, but safe is not the word. They are debts, reminders, and lessons. The guardians will watch over them, but they do not forgive mistakes and they do not forget trespassers. I swallowed, chest tight, mind spinning with visions of glowing figures and whispered arguments carried by the wind. The path beyond the trees seemed to beckon, a thin line between night and safety, but every step felt tethered to the vigil I'd witnessed. Remember this, he said, raising a finger to my chest, not touching but pressing the weight of warning against my soul. Leave now. Never return. Some graves are meant to be forgotten. Some names are meant to fade. But curiosity is patient and it is relentless. If you come back, the debts may include you. I nodded quickly, swallowing hard, trying to steady my breath. The wind shifted, carrying another whisper. He cannot leave. I glanced at the modern stones once more. Faint flickers of light danced among them, ghostly reminders of the vigil of the figures that had watched me earlier. My stomach churned. The caretaker's words echoed. Even if you leave, the earth remembers. I took a tentative step toward the path, then another, until I finally broke free of the fog and the press of shadows. Behind me, the cemetery stood silent, as if holding its breath, waiting for my next move. I didn't dare look back at the caretaker, though I could feel his gaze following me, heavy and unwavering. The wind carried one last whisper as I reached the edge of the forest. Remember. It was both warning and invitation, a reminder that what I had seen was not mine to command, and yet impossible to forget. The weight of it pressed into me even as I ran, the vigil, the debts, the guardians, all etched into my memory. I didn't stop until the lights of the town glimmered ahead, ordinary and warm. The cemetery was behind me, but I knew with a sinking certainty that it had followed me. The modern graves, the whispers, the figures, they were not confined by stone or fog. They lingered, patient and vigilant, waiting for curiosity to return. And I knew that one day I might not have a choice about that return.